Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting of February 2nd, 2016. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam President. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos present. President Breed.
Here.
Breed present. Supervisor Campos. Campos present. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen present. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell present. Supervisor Kim. Kim not present. Supervisor Marr. Marr present. Supervisor Peskin.
Present.
Peskin present. Supervisor Tang.
Present.
Tang present. Supervisor Wiener.
Present.
Wiener present. Supervisor Yee. Present. Yee present. Madam President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Madam Clerk, are there any communications?
I have none to report today, Madam President.
Okay, can you please read the consent agenda?
Items 1 through 12 comprise the consent agenda. These items are considered routine. If a member objects, an item may be removed and considered separately.
Okay, seeing no names on the roster, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll? Oh, Supervisor Marr?
Can I request to pull item number 11?
Okay. On the remaining items, excluding item number 11, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. There are 11 ayes.
These items are finally passed on the first reading, and adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, please read item number 11.
Item 11 is a resolution to urge the establishment of a local match commitment to the National Housing Trust Fund and to urge Senators Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein, and Representative Nancy Pelosi to further support the National Housing Trust Fund with expanded sources of revenue.
Supervisor Marr.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm urging you to support this resolution that would help us fund and increase our funding and preservation of the supply of rental housing for extremely low-income households and very low-income households, including homeless people. And it will also increase homelessness for these very vulnerable households. I wanted to thank the Community Housing Partnership and a national coalition that's working to match all National Housing Trust Fund funding awarded to recipient projects in our communities. Really important to urge our senators and representatives to further support not only national level support for the National Housing Trust Fund, but also expanded sources at the local level as well. As many of you know, affordable housing in our city is crucial, maybe the most crucial issue that we're addressing in order to ensure that all of our residents can be housed. Federal government has severely cut back on its funding for affordable housing, and the federal responses to homelessness need to include serious recommitments to funding affordable housing. For example, in San Francisco, our area median income last year for a single person was $71,000 per year, according to the Mayor's Office of Housing. However, many of our residents and families are considered by federal definition extremely low income or very low income. That's ELI or VLI. And that's households that make 30% or less of the area median income. An ELI household, for example, in San Francisco makes $23,800 or less. A very low-income household makes 50% of the area median income or less. This includes households that make equal to or less than $36,000 a year, and yet the fair market rent for a two-bedroom apartment in San Francisco is about $2,000 per month, while extremely low-income renter households can only afford to pay about $728 per month. So this would really help. The National Housing Trust Fund is a permanent federal program with dedicated sources of funding that are not subject to annual appropriations. And this resolution puts us on the record in support, but also commitments to local matching funds for this. And I strongly urge your support. Thank you to Paul Bowden, James Tracy, Gail Gilman, and the Community Housing Partnership and the coalition that's pushing for this. I urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you call items 13 and 14 together?
Item 13 is an ordinance to approve and authorize the Director of Property for the city's real estate division to execute a project delivery agreement with Oryx Development for the design and construction of proposed improvements to future city-owned real estate at 555 Selby Street, 1975 Galvez Avenue, and 450 Toland Street to create new facilities for the relocation of the city's central fleet maintenance shop from 1800 Gerald Street, with a total anticipated project delivery cost of $55 million from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission wastewater enterprise funds, and exempting the project from the contracting requirements by waiving certain sections of Administrative Code Chapter 6 and approving the selection of the developer, the project architect, and the general contractor without competitive bidding. Item 14 is an ordinance to appropriate a $62.2 million transfer from the Public Utilities Commission Wastewater Enterprise Fund to the City Administrator to implement the Central Shops relocation project in fiscal years 2015 through 16, 2016 through 17, and placing $45 million on Budget and Finance Committee reserve.
Thank you. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is an important item to me, and not just to me personally, but also to the baby community, because it's a key component on the critical path for the rebuild of the southeastern wastewater treatment plant. As many of you know, 80% of our city's waste is processed at this particular facility. And the facility is currently operating based on a 1950s technology, and it's having an adverse effect on the neighborhood every day, particularly with terrible odors and other environmental injustices that are occurring on a daily basis here. The baby community has been waiting for approximately 20 years for a new facility to be built. And while I don't typically like sole source contracts, many of you have voiced your concerns about this in the previous budget committee meeting, and I actually join you in your concerns about sole source contract. I want to ask that you also especially weigh and consider that we do need to ensure that the community does not face any more delays in receiving the much-needed upgrades to this plant. And I'm asking you to make a special consideration that this be a special priority, and we move forward today. The new location for Central Shops would allow the facility to stay in the Baby Hunters Point community, which is a better option from the one that was previously considered, which would have moved the facility to Brisbane, California. Additionally, going out to bid would delay the project a minimum of 3 years, and it cost the ratepayers approximately $3 million a month as a result of an escalation. So all of the requirements and obligations are being met. These are obligations for the contractors that will still be in place, including local hire and our own city's LBE goals. The only exception being asked for today is the sole source. This project is long overdue, and colleagues, I do hope that you will join me today in supporting this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a number of questions for PUC staff if they are here today.
We have the Director, Harlan Kelly. Mr. Kelly, will you please come forward to answer questions?
Thank you, Madam President. And first of all, I want to say, as a member who worked with then District 10 Representative Supervisor Sophie Maxwell, I've been committed to having our sewage treatment plant reach the dawn of the 21st century for 15 of those 20 years. What is inexplicable to me is that given the long history, that all of a sudden this has become a game of hurry up where I think everybody, as you said, should be, and we are troubled by the sole source nature. The fact that Chapter 29 of the Administrative Code is not being applied, that's the fiscal feasibility section of the code, I think is equally troubling. And quite frankly, on behalf of the ratepayers, I have concerns that the PUC is paying twice for a piece of property that was arguably paid for by the ratepayers through their sewage charges. So I have a series of concerns. Obviously, we want to see this project move forward. But I would like to ask, sorry, Mr. Kelly,
your back is to me, huh?
Mr. Kelly, first of all, does the PUC or Central Shops in possession of all of the property that it needs for these projects, central relocation, and, well, obviously you would have all of the land that you need for the sewage treatment plant. Do you have all of the land that we would need for Central Shops?
So, make sure I understand the question. The land that Central Shops...
Sorry, Mr. Kelly, could you identify yourself, please?
Okay. Harlan Kelly, General Manager of the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. To answer your question, the actual property that Central Shop presently is occupying was bought by wastewater bonds, but when the PUC, or when a wastewater was transferred to the PUC, that asset wasn't transferred to the PUC. It still was under the DPW or the city administrator, and that was a decision that we got from the city attorney's office. The second thing is that we realized that that site will be the ideal spot for our digesters. And so we looked at other pieces of property to put our digesters, but we wanted our digesters to be furthest away from the community, because as right now, the digesters are right adjacent to the community, and these are floating tops digesters that release gas. And so we've been having emergency contracts to repair that, so it's really in the best interest of the PUC and the community to move the digesters. As far as the location is concerned, you previously passed the resolution to allow us to acquire the property, which is in a nearby location, and also assume a lease. And that will be the site in which we will build the new facility for the Central Shops facility at that location. And so for us, it's a race against time. We would like to build those facilities and take possession of the site so that we can move quickly to rebuild the digesters that the community has been desperately needed.
Madam President, if you would indulge the supervisor for a few more questions.
Sure, Mr. Supervisor Peskin.
Wasn't Central Shops going to move to Brisbane until recently? I mean, wouldn't this have all been happening in some orderly fashion? I mean, what I don't understand here is how all of a sudden, 15 to 20 years later, there is this emergency with all of this cost escalation when this has been a subject of planning for the better part of 2 decades. How can it all of a sudden be so pressing? And I think the answer is, for some reason, the PUC abandoned the idea of relocating Central Shops to a piece of property that Mr. Updike was negotiating for in Brisbane. And I don't understand that, but I think that's, from what I can derive, what's led to this, sole source contracts, Chapter 29, and all the rest of it.
So, again, I think one of the I can go back as part of the Hetch-Hetchy ballot measure. It was contemplated at that time to include the wastewater portion. But at that time, they felt that that wouldn't be the appropriate vehicle. So that's where we actually dropped and we started doing the water system improvement program. And so since Prop E passed, then we looked at, okay, we need to focus on the wastewater side. And so we've had this wastewater or biosolid task force with the community, because at that time, the community felt that if you're not going to fix it, move it. And so we've been looking at what the cost would be and how would you deal with actually moving the facility. We finally got the community to understand that if we were to rebuild it, it will be $2 million in that community, and we will move the digesters and come up with the latest technology. In doing that, we then realized that where is the best place to put the digesters? And then we identified the Central Shops property as a possibility, because under CEQA, you can't predetermine, you have to come up with some alternatives. And that was the preferred alternative. So we were scouring the whole area to look at what property we can purchase. It was another piece of property, and I can have John talk about it, that we actually were placing a bid in it. We got outbidded. And so we started looking around for property, and the one in Brisbane became available. But that had some challenges because that had contaminated soil. And so it became really a project that actually was going to be delayed. And at the PUC, we started getting nervous. Also, it was some question by the mayor's office and board of supervisors we talked to actually move our facility in Brisbane. The police and the fire department was concerned because the deadhead time of going to Brisbane and back was another problem. Then all of a sudden, this land became available. It came, on the market, and that's when we jumped and really moved quickly to get this pieces of property and piece them together to actually solve the problem. And so that's why we are moving quickly. The other thing I want to mention is that our project is really hinged. This is a critical part of the project now because we've been moving as quickly as possible since we've identified the sewer system improvement program and identified the alternatives. That is actually costing us $3 million a month in escalation if we don't move quickly. And so that's why when we talk about, we need more studies, it's costing our ratepayers a lot of money. And so I do feel that the current location is probably the best location because it keeps all that jobs and all the facility in that area. So that's why it's urgent that we move as quickly as possible.
And then you indicated, Mr. Kelly, that the Central Shops purchase was originally purchased with sewer bonds. I assume that those bonds were repaid with sewer fees. Is that correct?
I believe so.
So if that's the case, how is it that a non-enterprise agency is been vested with this property that is really been paid for by the rate base and not by the taxpayers?
I would defer to the city attorney actually on that finding because that was part of their finding. But I would say that delay of this actually would cost the ratepayers more money because if you look at the price of the property, which is $11 million, and if we were to stall and wait 4 months, I just lost $12 million in escalation. So that's why, for me, it's so important to move this project ahead. And if there's a counting issue that we can deal on the backside, I would rather deal with that on the backside.
Well, let me ask you this. How long ago did this site with Central Shops become the preferred alternative?
The location of the Central Shops became about how long ago? No, the actual location of the digesters at Central Shops, not the property. I think about 2 years when we went through a process to look at what the preferred location of the digesters, which would be by Central Shops.
Colleagues, it seems to me with 2 years advance notice, I just personally have deep concerns about waiving our competitive bid requirements. I have deep concerns about, and I hear Mr. General Manager Kelly's argument with regard to even if we're charging the ratepayers twice, it's justified because of cost escalation. But I'm going to have a lot of trouble voting for this. I obviously want to get this project done. I'm happy, and this is not obviously my area of expertise, to try to make constructive suggestions. I think at 5.3 acres, Central Shops could possibly be, as other cities have shown, much more efficient size-wise. Perhaps there are ways to keep Central on there or to move to the Galvez site, but I just can't justify waiving competitive bid in this instance. I'm speaking for one supervisor. I do have one question that I asked initially, and maybe Mr. Updike is best suited to answer it, and that is whether or not the city now has site control of all of the properties that it needs on both sides of this deal.
John Updike, Director of Property. Supervisor, yes. So since the board's approval to pursue the 2 acquisitions and the 1 lease in December, we have since closed the escrow for 555 Selby and have possession to that site. It has a tenancy, but that tenancy will be terminating this spring. The 1975 Galvez purchase and sale agreement's now fully executed, entering escrow. They're doing an exchange, so that will actually be in escrow through the end of the month and close. And then the lease for 450 Toland has been fully executed. We have possession to that site and have made the first month's rental payment.
Thank you, Mr. Updike.
Supervisor Peskin, is that it?
Yes, Madam President, thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Madam President. I just have a question for the PUC as well, and that is how this contractor was selected for the sole source contract. Like what, usually we put out this bid, and I don't want there to be delays, but I also don't want to cut corners, and just wondering how this contractor was selected to get the munificence of a sole source contract.
Supervisor Avalos, John Updike. So let me briefly review the timeline with respect to this current assemblage of 3 properties and the timing for when we went out to find a developer team that could execute the project. So in July, we had finished the preliminary project assessment and delivered that to planning. It actually included the Selby and Galvez properties, but contemplated a different leased site than the one we actually chose because those lease negotiations failed to produce a lease at a good price. So as of July, we felt we had a sense of the project. We were just beginning design, less than 20% design. And at that point, given the mandate to move this project along at a very swift pace, we looked at alternative means of delivering the project. And we had a broker team engaged at Cushman & Wakefield who assisted us in getting out in the marketplace and seeking someone who, A, had the bandwidth to be able to handle the project in a very hot market. Take yourself back to July. That clearly was the peak of our market. Things might, the foot's off the accelerator a little bit right now, but in July, everyone was slammed with projects. And then has to have the skill set for a fairly unique project on 2 different sites to move it forward. And the ability to understand the city's rules and regulations and follow the Public Works Code. And so in doing so, the broker team put us in touch with the current group in front of you now, Oryx Development, Pankow Construction, and FME Architecture. And we then began discussing with them this concept of a project with no promises whether there would be delivery of a project to them, full disclosure that this would be subject to the board's approval because this would be at total variance to our normal delivery of a public works project. Engage them to begin to look at pricing and schedule to confirm our assumption that this was a faster, more efficient delivery of the project on behalf of the PUC. And then that brought us to this point today. We did not get CEQA clearance until October 28th. So we are moving as swiftly as we can as we get each milestone required to take that next step. Be difficult to enter into a design contract until we really had CEQA nailed down, so you can begin to see how those series of milestones were really compressed to get us to today.
And who were the brokers?
Cushman Wakefield.
So the brokers,
they had a team of brokers, and we asked them to, because they have knowledge of the development community, are keyed in directly with them. We asked them to go out into the marketplace, see who had the availability, make some suggestions to us, and have us vet those suggestions.
And how typical is it that the brokers, like Cushman Wakefield, are the ones who give ideas for the city on who to go into contract with?
This is unique. There's no question about it. This is not the preferred or normal path of delivering a public project. So I don't know that I can say this is what we'd always do, because this isn't what we normally do. But who would we turn to who has the understanding of the development community and who's busy on certain projects and who isn't, and who has skill sets that we have identified and who doesn't? The brokerage community is a natural party to turn to. So turn over those rocks very quickly on our behalf.
Right. I'm just want to figure out like what process and consideration did the PUC or real estate go through before the broker stepped in and said, hey, this is a good thing to do, rather than go through your typical process? Because you mentioned that everyone was maxed out, all the other contractors who have expertise have been maxed out. But what way, how did you assess that? What process did the city go through for that?
Quite frankly, of the top 50 developers in the Bay Area, there's really only about 6 that would have the capacity to pull off this project. We know those 6. We did make contact both before our decision to move forward with this particular team was presented and after, to cross-check that the agreement that we had negotiated, in particular the development fee, was reasonable or better than reasonable as the client, to cross-check that with those who do mixed-use or industrial projects. The majority of the large Bay Area firms either specialize in residential or office. There are very few who do this kind of a project delivery. Furthermore, with respect to the general contractor, we obviously, with our colleagues at the Department of Public Works and at PUC, are well aware of those who have the capacity to pull off a fairly large project of this nature. We're very comfortable with the selection of Pankow, who has done several projects for the city very successfully in the past and demonstrated a commitment to LBE as well.
So what communication happened with potential contractors before the brokers stepped in and suggested Pankow? And
the brokers had that discussion. I was not engaged directly in that discussion. We had a discussion with this particular team to see if indeed there was a fit there, and took that forward. We did not identify in the marketplace anyone else who had this set of skills and this availability that this team presented. Thus, we are here today with this sole source request. And that was verified then when we checked back into the marketplace after the holidays, once we knew the specific fiscal metrics of this transaction. Got the same response in terms of availability or desire to work on this kind of a project on behalf of the city. Those who had that capacity did not have the interest.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, this is typically what we face in terms of false choices, or over and over again. Either you approve a sole source contract that didn't go through the competitive bid process that could potentially give us some cost savings on what the cost of a project is, or delaying and costing more money. And I don't necessarily think that we have to accept such a false choice. I will be voting against the sole source contract.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalo. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam President. If I may, through the chair, I wanted to ask our budget and legislative analyst, Mr. Rose, I know that you and your team reviewed this transaction. From what Supervisor Peskin asked our general manager, it seems like they, if maybe I misunderstood, that they sort of started focusing on this property, or at least saw this property as a possible option about 2 years ago. And I'm trying to understand why they haven't been able to they weren't able to do a competitive bid. So I'm just wondering what your review of the facts. I mean, what's your sense of why there was so competitive bid here?
Madam President, Budget Analyst Harvey Rose.
Yes.
Supervisor Campos, members of the board, we specifically asked that question that Supervisor Peskin has brought up, and on page 24 of our report, if I could quote, The proposed ordinance, and that is file 15-1226, would waive the competitive bidding requirements in the city's administrative code and approve the selection of Oryx LLC as developer and the developer's selection of FM&E Architecture and Design as project architect and Charles Pankow Builders Ltd. as general contractor. The ordinance states that due to time constraints coupled with the current extraordinarily competitive real estate market for industrial land, the Director of Property informally approached entities capable of executing the proposed project and identified one team reasonably available and deemed capable of carrying out the proposed project within the time frame required and within the budget developed. And this was one of the reasons, Supervisor Campos, that we said that approval of this legislation is a policy matter, because while it is true that a delay of the project can result in escalation costs, that can be said for any major city project. So therefore, our thinking was that you could say that there should not be competitive bidding for any major project, because there could be a delay in the competitive bidding would result in a delay and therefore resulting increase in escalation costs.
Thank you. I have a couple more points, but I want to give the general manager an opportunity to add his 2 cents.
Yeah. Harlan Kelly, General Manager of the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. I just wanted to make sure it's clear that the site in which we identified to put the digesters was Central Shops. That was 2 years ago. The property that we've identified, we identified 6 months ago. So I just want to make sure it's clear that 6 months ago. It's not like 2 years. We had 2 years to plan for this site. That site became available 6 months ago when we were still working on the Brisbane, and that's why we jumped on it, because right now we're being delayed. And the other thing is, for me, it's not all about the money at the PUC. We have environmental justice policy, and I feel that we owe the people in the community to really deal with our treatment plant and the odors that it causes that impact the people in that community.
So if I may, given that it was 6 months ago, if I may ask Mr. Updike, why couldn't you do a competitive bid 6 months ago when you first became aware of this?
Supervisor, John Updike, Director of Real Estate. So to answer that question, you have to go back to what the sequence of delivery of the project is. So while we had 6 months ago began the discussions for acquisition of 2 sites and leasing of another, but again, we did not have board authority secured until December to actually effect those transactions. Parallel to that, we had to do some level of initial design for the project and secure some level of CEQA approval for the project before we could legitimately engage in a bidding process for the project. And so that, as I mentioned, was not concluded until October 28th, when the CEQA determination was provided. And at that point, design was optimistically characterized at 15%. We did engage the Department of Public Works to assist us. They provided the initial design. So we began on a traditional path, but recognized that we were going to run out of runway to meet the schedule provided to us if we continued down that path.
How long would it take for you through the chair to do a competitive bid process?
So first of all, we recommended that you do a design build, because that you can start the construction as soon as possible. And in doing that, you couldn't sign a construction contract until the CEQA is done. And so to actually do a traditional, we would have to hire a designer. And then once the design, then we have to hire a contractor. And so that could be maybe 8 months or 9 months till we get to this point. And so we felt that we wanted to move as quickly as possible. And that's assuming that everything goes accordingly to schedule. But when you go out with, you may have addendums and questions, and so it could take longer. So we felt that this method of design build is the fastest way, especially getting the contractor on board, because as the designer is designing, they can start construction on the foundation work and all the stuff while they're identifying the finishes and stuff that are required for the building so that we can get this project going as soon as possible.
If I may, before I make a final point, I wanted to ask a question to Mr. Updike. Thank you. Mr. Updike, how many times has your department waived the competitive bid requirements in the last year?
So, Supervisor John Updike, Director of Real Estate, this is a waiver under Chapter 6. The Real Estate Department actually has very limited authority in Chapter 6. Our authority is related to fire life safety systems, vertical circulation, elevators, things of that nature. In that capacity, we have waived competitive bidding on very rare but emergency exigent circumstances. The other waivers under Chapter 6, more akin to this project, would have been executed through the Department of Public Works to the Board of Supervisors.
Well, if I may, I know I wanted to just ask the budget and legislative analysts, not ask, but just to point. I think it would be nice to know how often competitive bidding is being waived, either by the Department of Real Estate or through the involvement of the Department of Real Estate. So I will be submitting a motion asking the budget and legislative analysts to look at that issue. It appears to me that this has become a more common occurrence by the Department of Real Estate, and I think that getting to the facts around that is really important. I have to say that I came in here, notwithstanding the fact that I have consistently raised the issue of competitive bidding, and I'm glad to see other people interested in it. I came in here thinking I was going to support this. Because I know the importance of this project. I actually feel bad for the residents, and I feel bad for the PUC as well, to the extent that I feel like this could have and should have been handled better. What really bothered me is the way in which, Mr. Updike, you have talked about how you approach this. The whole point of competitive bidding is to get away from a scenario where there's too close a relationship between an industry and government. And the idea that you automatically, when you look at a project, know 6 developers and you know and make a decision as to their ability to do a project, that bothers me because that's not how contracts are supposed to work. The reason why you have a formal process is so that as a government agency, you don't make assumptions about who is able or not able to make, to bid for a project. And quite frankly, it is because of those assumptions being made on a number of cases that a lot of companies are left out of these processes. And I don't think that's how contracting should work. I don't think that it should be based on your understanding of where the market is. And the explanation given to the budget and legislative analysts, to me, is very problematic. It's the current extraordinarily competitive real estate market for industrial land. What does that mean? According to whom? Whose judgment? And so I really feel, given the number of times that this department has come to us with something unusual and out of the ordinary, that we need to step back and beyond this transaction really look back and see what's going on here. It really bothers me, it really troubles me. And especially when we're seeing questions about contracting and whatnot, this is the time that we want to have as much transparency. And when we follow the rules, not because they're convenient, not because they're it's easy, but because they're there. So I really, the more I hear about it and the more I hear from the Department of Real Estate, the more I'm like, okay, I thought I was going to support it, but I can't support it right now. And it's too bad because I think that the work needs to be done. And I would hope that whatever happens, that going forward, that we don't take these shortcuts because these shortcuts end up actually costing more time, and in the end, they actually hurt the people that you're trying to help.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I had a couple of follow-up questions. Actually, Supervisor Peskin had asked about the appropriate use of the source of funds between the ratepayers fund versus the general fund, being that we are actually rehabilitating a site that would be used for general fund purposes, typically, but we're using ratepayer funds to move them for the purposes of the PUC to rebuild on that site. And so if you could clarify the response to that.
Well, Harlan Kelly, General Manager of the PUC. I can just say that there has been situations where we do an eminent domain.
Is that what we're doing in this case?
Well, I mean, it's hard for government to do eminent domain against
On
another
itself.
government agency, but the same principles apply, that they are in a location, and normally we go through a process of relocating them through eminent domain and actually a like facility. And so that's something that we are providing for Central Shops, because right now they're up and functioning, and what we're doing is we're asking them to relocate to a location, and so we're actually paying for them to relocate like we would do if it was a business that they are occupying the land that is from the city attorney owned by Central Shops.
So if it was a different business, if it wasn't a city department or city public function, we would have a lease with this entity on the PUC site.
Actually, you talking about on the existing site or the new site?
So what I'm saying is that, let's say it wasn't a city department, let's say it wasn't Central Shops, but we were leasing to a private business, and we had to move them in the midst of their lease, then of course we would pay to move them and potentially even negotiate paying for their tenant improvements so the other site was appropriate. So in this case, was there a lease that Central Shops had with the PUC on the site?
Well, it was determined that Central Shops actually owned the property.
Okay.
Yes.
That was really confusing. There was a lot of...
yeah, I lost that battle.
So that was what was
Central
finally
Shops,
determined.
yes.
So this was the jurisdictional transfer in exchange for moving them to a different site and purchasing part of the land and then leasing part of the land. Okay. And then my second question, so I'm trying to find the page that I looked at this, but Oryx, you had mentioned that you looked at all the companies in the Bay Area that could do this work. And if I remember correctly, Oryx is a company that's based in Nevada. Is that correct?
John Updike, Director of Real Estate, Supervisor Kim. The Shell LLC formed specifically for this project, which is typical in the real estate industry to address liability concerns, was a Nevada corporation, but these are individuals who are in San Francisco, working in San Francisco, delivering San Francisco projects. They simply made a business decision to incorporate this particular LLC out of Nevada. They are here if you would like to address a question to them, because I don't really want to speak for their business decision on their behalf, if you'd like.
So the company is open about the fact that it's set up a shell company in another state to flout some of our existing local laws as a business decision? I mean, that's why companies set up a shell in another state, because they want to avoid either taxes or regulations that they don't like in the state of California or in the city and county of San Francisco.
Your supervisors, my name is Juan Carlos Wallace with Oryx Development. We are a San Francisco company. We were formed in San Francisco 2 years ago. As Mr. Updike has mentioned, it's a common practice to form entities specific to projects in real estate. Many of them are formed in Delaware. Many of them are formed in Nevada and other states. We pay taxes in San Francisco. And let me just give a little bit of background about ourselves, because sometimes I feel that developers are this unknown entity in the background. I have lived in San Francisco for 20 years. I formed this company 2 years ago with my partner, John Romsbacher, who is here in the audience today. He has lived in San Francisco for 20 years. We've created a team with many years of background in real estate ourselves. We have background in development and investing in San Francisco and the Bay Area for many years. And that is the team we've created adds to this. I care deeply about our community, and I actually have reason to believe that we should be paying a lot of attention to the Bayview community that is being affected by this. And I personally think that it's a very important decision. In addition, the company itself, although it's a separate LLC, is employing people in the Bay Area. Pankow is a Bay Area company, and they have over a dozen projects in San Francisco, many of which you know of, several of them done for San Francisco as a city entity. We have 3 projects in San Francisco, valued at about $250 million in development value, Oryx ourselves. And the architect that we're employing, FME Architecture, has a number of projects here in San Francisco. So I don't want it to be lost that we are a San Francisco company, and we are employing people both internally within Oryx and with our team members, Pankow and FME, in San Francisco proper. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Could you explain why we list you as a Nevada company?
The LLC that was formed is a Nevada LLC.
Why is that?
No state taxes.
Why is that?
It's income tax purposes. It's a pass-through LLC, but we pay, if any income that comes from the LLC would come to me as a person. I reside in San Francisco and pay San Francisco taxes. So my portion of that LLC, which is 50%, would pass through to me.
So why would you need to set up an LLC in Nevada if you're paying all your taxes in San Francisco? I'm sorry, I'm not a business owner, so excuse my...
And I might have to consult my tax accountant to answer some of that question.
So if you're not escaping any of our tax legislation, why would you set up your LLC in Nevada?
It's primarily for federal tax purposes as well.
So evading federal taxes, not our local.
So my name is John Romsbacher. I'm also a partner in Oryx. And the reason for doing a Nevada LLC versus a California, I mean, there is really, it's our tax, not the tax, there's no tax benefits for Nevada versus California whatsoever, because it's a pass-through entity. We're still paying all of our taxes in California. It would only be, Nevada has very slightly, and I couldn't actually enumerate them for you, better liability protection than a California entity would, but it's actually insignificant, and we'd have to go back to our attorney as to why they chose Nevada versus California.
Okay. So, Mr. Wallace, I appreciate, so you remain very active here in San Francisco and San Francisco politics, is my understanding?
Well, I'm a concerned citizen. I'm involved in local politics, yes.
You're involved in several different organizations and groups here in the city, too.
Correct.
You take position on a number of different issues.
On occasion.
Okay. My final question is for actually back to the PUC, or actually I'm not sure who this question is for. This actually came up in my meeting yesterday about the headways or the between Brisbane and the Bayview. And so, in my experience, Brisbane is not that much farther from San Francisco. So if you could talk a little bit about why this was such an important factor in determining that the central shops had to be in the Bayview versus Brisbane, and why that matters. So if we're fixing buses and trucks, what is the urgency in the additional 20 minutes that it may take? It's not that we're bringing muni buses in and then trying to route them right back out onto the streets. I mean, they're probably in for fairly major maintenance repairs. It's not the expectations that they're going to go straight back out onto a route, save 20 minutes. So what was the reasoning behind that?
Several reasons. So first of all, to have a city central shops that is core to the vehicles that operate in the city, the emergency vehicles that is currently residing in San Francisco, and say now we're going to Brisbane, that's one issue. The second issue is that when you look at time that it takes to actually bring a fire truck that needs to be repaired and bring it all the way to Brisbane, and then when it's repaired, you go all the way to Brisbane and bring it back, when it would was right off the freeway that you have access to get your facilities. Also, Central Shops have a gas where you can fuel your vehicle as well. So it had multiple purposes. And so, which led to, anyway, it has multiple purposes. So the other factor I would say is the Brisbane site has contaminated soil, and actually that option will take a lot longer to resolve, and that's why when we found the property that is adjacent to the current property, we felt that dealt with the union issues, because the unions were also concerned about taking their vehicles to Brisbane and not right by a freeway that has a fueling facility that you can use for all the city vehicles. And so that was some of the reasons why this site became a more appealing site for everyone involved.
And when you say the soil was contaminated, was there a consideration of the cost to clean that soil before we moved the Central Shops over there?
Supervisor John Updike. And when you're talking about the contamination of the soil, you're referencing the Brisbane site, just to be sure I understand. So the issue is there's a mitigation plan that is still not yet approved by the appropriate state regulatory authority, and that delay was causing increasing concern by the city as the potential tenant of the property. To this day, I don't believe that is still yet resolved. They do have a mitigation plan. The costs of that mitigation were included in the pro forma, so we knew going in what it would likely cost to have the soil contamination mitigated and put a vapor extraction system in as well, and provide adequate protection to our employees. So we certainly went through that vetting process. What we couldn't get was to a point where the regulatory authority said, okay, owner, you may go forward with that project. So we were then stalled as the prospective tenant. We had to wait for that and just could not wait any longer. I also want to mention one other concern is the limited access to the Brisbane site. It was either via Bayshore or the 101. And so in a large seismic event, there was a concern that we just wouldn't have a route in and out of there to get back to the city, whereas the selected site is a little more centralized. Granted, it's still southeast, but it still has multiple access routes, and we felt that in an emergency situation, we'd have a better opportunity to serve our fleet.
And this is just my final question, Mr. Updike. Just my final question. Thank you. And really, I think we only ask these questions, again, because this is a sole source contract. Again, if this was competitively bid out, I don't think that we would lay as much scrutiny over the selection and a number of other things. When you said that there's only 6 companies that can do a design, build, construct, which we'd like to do because of the haste and the speed by which we want to fix the sewage treatment plant, which I think we all agree has to be done. You had said that there were roughly 6 companies. So do we have letters from the 5 other companies that they were unable to take on this work? So we here on the board know that this is in fact the case, that no other company would have been able to effectively bid on this contract if we had gone out for an RFP.
First, to clarify, my point was that we identified 6 available companies to be able to have the capacity to do this out of the largest
I see. Sorry, I
group of developers
in
the Bay Area. So that was of 50, of the top 50 by volume. In terms of gross revenues, we saw 6 that had the capacity to pull this off. No, we did not have written responses. The conversations with them, both before the project was scoped and brought before you, and after, to vet the numbers, was done on a confidential basis from those companies. Frankly, they were more open and honest with me with that proviso at their request. And I'm happy to offline have a discussion with who those companies are, although one could kind of figure that out, who the top 6 would be. But nonetheless, we got much more in-depth information from the firms, particularly relative to fee structures on the agreements. That was helpful, frankly, in our negotiations.
So you did get estimates from these 6 companies, and then based on what you had seen, you felt that you had made the best selection in reaching out for a sole source contract.
Yes, relative to the developer fee, which is really the big variable here. And then the other cross-check was asking the Department of Public Works, what would it take to carry out a traditional project? We did have that scoped. That's where the time delta that Mr. Kelly has been speaking to came from. What's a traditional path? What is that time? We also asked, what's the traditional cost then for a design-build project with no exceptions, competitively bid, and that number was approximately $40 million over the number provided to you for the delivery of this project. So there is a considerable savings. While that's not the be-all, end-all, we did want to do that cross-checking exercise to be sure we were being competitive in as many line items as possible.
So I just want to clarify again, because I think I did misunderstand either yesterday or today. It's not that there is roughly 6 companies that can do this work. There was roughly 6 companies that were available to do this work. And of those 6, we had reached out and asked for estimates of what that cost to the city would be.
No, I'm suggesting that we believe there were 6 companies with the capacity, the financial capacity to do this work. Not available.
Okay.
But with the capacity, and therefore that's who we reached out to.
Okay. And so of those with the capacity to do this work, how many did you believe were available to do this work?
None.
None. This is the only one. So I guess, so then I will re-ask my question again. Is there a letter from these 6 companies that say that they are not available to do this work?
There is not. Again, it was a confidential process.
Thank you.
Supervisor Kim, is that all? Supervisor Yee?
Thank you, Madam President. I wasn't going to pursue this line of questioning, and I'm not too sure if I see other speakers, whether or not they wanted to continue this line of questioning. I didn't want to break into that. So I would like to ask if Supervisor Peskin and Supervisor Campos and Cohen, whether or not you wanted to continue this sort of pursuit of questioning. If not, then I'll make my statement.
The floor is yours.
That's fine, Supervisor Yee.
Okay. Well, let me just say that I appreciate my colleagues' line of questioning. It's pretty similar to some of the questions that I posed at the Budget Committee, and in particular, the sourcing was really disturbing to me. And then there was some discussion. Well, we delay it. It's gonna cost the project. I forget how much, $1.5 million or something like that. $3 million every month, right, or something. So, in listening to all the arguments and listening to, there's a little bit of me wondering whether or not how far can I push, and say, is this really the actual case or not? And but at the end of the day, for me, I'm still a little uneasy with the sole sourcing because, as I said at the Budget Committee, yeah, where do we stop? And because every project is almost the same word, you could say, well, it's going to cost us more if we delay the project, at least in this climate. But I think what tilted the balance for me was the issue of environmental justice, and that probably was the determining factor for me to say pass it out with positive recommendation. And that's why I wanted to talk to Supervisor Cohen about this, because in looking at the map, it certainly seems like an environmental justice issue for me. And so I'm not hearing anything from the arguments that would change me from that decision. So I will be supporting this project going forward.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam President. And Supervisor Yee, I'm glad you still have a little bit of an open mind on this. I mean, here is my fundamental concern, and that concern has actually been exacerbated during this discussion, as what I believe I heard, and maybe Mr. Updike, you can address that, is that rather than the city pursuing the contractor and architect, actually a third party, a non-city party, the broker was put in that position. We have a Department of Public Works that contracts for all kinds of contracts. Matter of fact, the PUC uses DPW to build things for. We have an airport that does incredible project management. Since when did this municipal corporation start using real estate brokers to hire design build outfits? That just is, unique is an understatement. I'm also getting increasingly concerned in my 7th week in office after I turned a blind eye but stood up at this board and spoke to the fact that it was without precedent that we were authorizing our Department of Real Estate to purchase real property without the benefit of an appraisal. That in the previous meeting on December 8th, we were asked to approve the sale of a piece of real property that this board had approved for sale at $87 million, which the department had received a offer at $91 million, yet this board was being asked to sell it for $80 million. I'm seeing this now in a larger context. Finally, what I just heard from the gentleman, Mr. Wallace, who stood up, is that this is a 2-year-old company. Since when are we doing $55 million deals with 2-year-old companies? Maybe, I don't know what the relationship is with Cushman & Wakefield, but I am interested not in hearing from them, but in hearing from city staff, whether it's our general manager of the PUC or the head of our Department of Real Estate, what experience that this company in its 2-year history has in design build projects of $55 million. So through the chair to Supervisor Yee, I pray that if this board approves this deal, that in a year or 2 years, we're not doing management audits, performance audits, and supplemental appropriations because we're dealing with a brand new 2-year-old company that somehow got a sole source contract through a third-party real estate broker. This thing doesn't smell right to this supervisor. Which one of you gentlemen would like to answer that question with regard to the experience of this new firm relative to design build contracts?
John Updike, Director of Real Estate. Not sure exactly what question has been posed, but let me do my best to address the issues you've raised. With respect to who we're hiring and how we went out to the marketplace, the question of seeking a developer is not something the Department of Public Works would do, because the Department of Public Works is essentially the developer for the city. So when we're looking at a project where we're looking at a different model of delivering that project, that was my charge. Look at figuring out how to deliver this project in a timeline and a price that is not consistent with the current Public Works Chapter 6 process. The expediter necessary is the developer entity. Therefore, it is appropriate to turn to the community that knows developers, and that's the brokerage community, and ask them for their expertise. That's what we pay them for. And in this case, we didn't pay them for that service. We have an understanding with the development community. When we reach out to them, they help us, and vice versa. So we have an excellent working relationship with the development community. So we felt it was appropriate to turn to them to assist us with the developer. With respect to the developer's qualifications, as Mr. Wallace noted, he and his partners are longstanding San Franciscans and have project delivery experience in San Francisco 4 years. Yes, they are a 2-year-old company under the current umbrella of Oryx, but we're hiring just like we would make any other hire decision on the totality of their experience, and that's decades of experience. But more importantly, the developer is the facilitator and the expediter. The crucial element is who's the general contractor and who's the architect, and do they have the skill sets and the capacity to carry off the project. And there we're very pleased in that the family that we are bringing forward, Oryx as the developer, Pankow as the GC, and FME, who has very unique experience sets that I'll stack up against any architectural firm, That combination we were very pleased to secure. We've been working with the Department of Public Works on this project from the beginning, so they are a partner on this venture. Just because I'm here does not mean I'm the advocate for the project. I'm simply the spokesperson for the project. I want to make that clear. This is simply a charge we were given to deliver a project in a unique fashion. Doesn't mean that's what I wanted to do. It is what I'm doing out of necessity. And we've tried to do our best to ensure that the taxpayers are protected in that the development agreement is as tight and financially smart as it can possibly be. And we have that confidence with the development fee of 3.5% and the line items included and the guaranteed maximum price delivery that's before you now.
If I
hope
may,
that was responsive to your question, sir.
Well, I am pleased to know that the development fee at 3.5% is 1.5% less than the development fee at the Goodwill site on another project, but that is neither here nor there. My specific question, which I didn't hear an answer to, I heard that the principals in Oryx, which is a 2-year-old company, have decades of experience. But the specific question that I had, which is whether Oryx, or as you answer the question, these individuals with their decades of experience have any demonstrated design-build experience of this magnitude, a $55 million project. That was the question that I didn't hear an answer to.
John Updike, Director of Real Estate. So, Supervisor, I think that question has to be asked in the context of the entire team. So between the general contractor and the architect and Oryx, yes, without question, they have delivered on similar design-build ventures, both for the city and for others within the city and throughout the Bay Area. With respect to Oryx, yes, those individuals involved in Oryx, who are the key project managers, and if you look at the project delivery agreement, there is no ability to swap out project managers. We're really hiring individuals here to deliver this project because any change requires the consent, which is at our sole and absolute discretion. So we're hiring that expertise of the individuals of the firm. They also have, as Mr. Wallace, I think, mentioned, they're right in the midst of $250 million worth of projects now. And they have a pipeline that we have reviewed that's similar or greater in scope than what we're proposing here.
Not to put too fine a point on it, Mr. Updike, and I am looking at their website, which includes a 120-unit residential project, a 44-unit multifamily residential project, and a 256-unit residential project. None of these are the kind of design-build projects I'm talking about. Can you just give me an example of one project that one of these individuals has worked on that is a design-build project of this or a similar typology? That's my simple question. It's a yes or no question. I realize that there are other FME and Panko, but I'm asking it at least as to Oryx.
Supervisor, rather than me speaking on behalf of the firm, I'd appreciate if you've lend the courtesy of having one caller's answer. Thank you.
So, and specifically within San Francisco.
Can you identify yourself, please?
My name is Juan Carlos Wallace, again with Oryx Development, one of the principals of Oryx. Specifically within San Francisco, within the last 4 years, our team has completed 3 different projects, $20 million historic retrofit of a building here in San Francisco, interior retrofit, $35 million project at Transbay. In my prior work, I was with SKS Investments. We worked on 888 Brandon, 181 Fremont. My colleague, Laura Billings, who will be the project coordinator, has worked on projects both in the city and outside of the city, delivering projects for Pete's Coffee, delivering projects at Stanford Business Center. And here in San Francisco, we're currently building the projects that you mentioned, which are about $250 million of development projects. In addition, and I think very importantly, we have experience working together with Panko. Panko is our general contractor on our Van Ness project. FME is an architect that we've used on light industrial projects in the East Bay and in the South Bay. FME and Panko have worked together on a number of projects both in the city and outside of the city. So, I'm happy to give you this list of projects. We have 24 here. So we have a lot of experience collectively, both within Oryx and with our team. So I do feel that the city's being very well served with the expertise that our team brings. I understand that maybe the Board of Supervisors would have preferred to go through a competitive bid process. We would have been happy to participate in something like that as well. I think in the context of the schedule and budget that the city's trying to meet, the city's also well served by entering into a phase one contract, essentially with a firm like ours, to advance the design, advance the project, to get it to the point where you can decide you want to move forward with the phase two delivery, the actual construction of the project. And that has been the intent of our structure, negotiated structure with the city. I will add that we have 3 clients here. We are working with the Department of Public Works, the GSA or PUC, and then we're very much partnering with all 3 and the central shops as the end user. So the role of the developer is enhanced in many ways by managing the different user groups within the city, and by user I mean end user, as well as the money that's coming from PUC, and then the client at the DPW side that will be our partners hand in hand in managing the project day to day, as well as the contractor and architect. In addition, delivering it within a tight time frame in 2 locations. So we feel very comfortable delivering this. I'm happy to sit down separately and provide more background on us as a firm, as well as our interest. I would say that you keyed in on 2 years of experience as a firm. As a firm, that's true. My partners and I have known each other for 15 years in the business. We all have, a couple decades of experience in real estate, so we feel we're very well equipped. And if anything, I think this is an opportunity for a relatively new San Francisco-based company with a lot of experience that the team provides to deliver a project that I think is important for the community.
Thank you. And if you want it fair and square through an RFP, I'd be voting for you.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you. If I may, wanted to follow up on a couple of points. If I may, through the chair, to our budget and legislative analyst, I understand, and this is, I understand the point that Supervisor Yee made earlier. The problem I have with that is that I know that in looking at a competitive process, there are different options that a department has. That you have the option of pursuing a longer, more perhaps in-depth process, competitive process that would take a few months. But there are also other options that allow you to do a competitive process that doesn't take as long. So I'm wondering if the budget and legislative analysts can talk about that in terms of what the options are for these departments in terms of looking at that through the chair.
President Breed.
Yes, Mr. Rose.
President Breed, Harvey Rose, budget analyst. Supervisor, I think you're referring to, there is what we call an RFQ process, a request for qualifications process, and that's where you basically look at the firm's qualifications to perform the type of project that is needed. And that RFQ process, as opposed to a complete, extensive competitive bid process, certainly is less formal, it's less time-consuming, and less extensive than a full competitive bid process. So it is possible that an RFP process could have been used a couple of years ago, but I would defer to the department. I think you should ask that question to the department as to whether or not they considered that and if that was a viable option.
Yeah, if I may, through the chair, if I could ask Mr. Updike about that. Why? I know you decided not to do a competitive bid, request for proposal, but why not do a request for qualification? That allows you to do a competitive process that is not as extensive, that will take less time. And if the general manager said this property was identified or came up about 6 months ago as a possible site, why not just do an RFQ? Mr. Updike.
So while a request for qualifications process is available to us for a number of different projects to deliver them, there is no form within the context of Chapter 6, which is why this item is before you now. It's a deviation from Chapter 6 public hiring process. We would still be back before this body with the results of that, and it would have taken quite some time to develop a request for qualifications because it would have to be a one-off process specific to this site, specific to our needs, because we don't do RFQs for this type of work. So we did not see a great value and actually saw perhaps some risk in having, if we rushed it, the potential for challenges in that selection process as well. We didn't have a lot of winning paths available to us here, to be quite frank. So we did not see that as a very viable option because it isn't an established route for securing these types of services. So it would have required quite a bit of work by the City Attorney's Office and Department of Public Works to assist to develop that.
Well, I'll tell you that actually...
Kelly might want to expand on that as well if you give him the courtesy of doing that.
Yes, please.
So from my understanding is that when you go through an RFQ, you're asking for qualifications, but from that qualification, you don't enter into a contract. Normally, we do an RFQ to identify who's qualified, and then we go through another process to select the actual person or the entity. That's why we do typically an RFP process, because you have a proposal. And so I don't know if Harvey knows, or I'm trying to understand the RFQ process, because I know an RFQ that basically you base on qualifications, and that's how we get the pool of bidders. And then we go through an RFP process through the folks who we deem qualified. So I don't know. I think that's the things in Chapter 6, all the tools that are in Chapter 6. And I don't know. I haven't it been amended a couple of times, but I'm not understanding if there's an RFQ process that you identify and you can make a selection off an RFQ process.
Well, I mean, my understanding is that where an RFQ comes in is that it may not be the ideal approach, that actually having an RFP is probably the most comprehensive way of ascertaining that someone is providing you the best deal, but that to choose between no competitive process at all and an RFQ, that actually the RFQ provides the benefit of at least knowing that you had at least an assessment of what the expertise in the industry is. I mean, so that's the benefit. But the other thing I was going to say, and I'll tell you that it's kind of sad. You know, the more we hear from the Department of Real Estate, the more questions arise. If you don't have an RFQ process in place, then you should really figure out how you pursue that going forward, because I would rather have you follow an imperfect process than having no process where you simply do a sole source contract. So that's one thing. But the second point is, it is really troubling to me that you had a company here talk about how they became a Nevada company for purposes of liability. I imagine that for purposes of liability means to minimize their own liability. And so, it's a two-way street. So if being a Nevada corporation makes it so that you are protected more, I'm not sure if on the issue of liability for the city, it makes sense to enter into a contract with a company that is headquartered in Nevada if that means that their liability is minimized. So, I mean, that's kind of scary. I hope the city attorneys, I'm sure they're looking at that. But again, the more that is said, the more questions arise. I would say, I don't know where people are, but I would hope that enough questions have been raised that we reject this, make folks do a competitive bid. We can do it quickly. I don't know if it's an RFP, if it's a different process, if it's a shortened, expedited process. But I think that the point here is that we have to strike a balance between moving this forward quickly, but to do it in a way that we ensure this is done in a way that is a good deal for the city, and that we're following the rules of fairness that were intended to be in place for a reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I appreciate the spirited the conversation, I think one thing that we can all agree on and is that the Department of Real Estate has been put on notice, and they should be aware that they should not ever bring anything half-baked to us again and expect an approval process. Every question that's been raised, not everyone, excuse me, majority of the questions have been raised have been valid. There's been a few that were not. Specifically, or not specifically, but to Supervisor Kim's question about moving Central Shops out of San Francisco and into Brisbane, correct, Brisbane is our neighbor to the south, but I did receive many conversations and emails and concerns, largely from labor, exporting a number of jobs out of the city and into another city. As you can imagine, the concern, the natural concern around that. And to Supervisor Yee, I did stop by your office, or I think it was earlier this week or late last week, just to share with you some candid conversation about my perspective. And I want to be very honest with you, colleagues, that I am resentful for the position that I have been placed in, largely from this proposal. I don't know who to blame, either real estate or the PUC, I don't know. But it is certainly an uncomfortable feeling to be placed here and then have colleagues look to me and ask me what my opinion is and how I would opine and to provide some direction. So I am asking you to support this. This is important. Nonetheless, it's been 20 years. We've tried to rebuild the wastewater treatment plant twice since 2002, and we have been unsuccessful. And I'm extremely uncomfortable with the process that real estate has brought to us, but I'm even more uncomfortable going back to constituents and saying, hey, listen, on a technicality, we're going to have to delay the rebuild of this wastewater treatment plant. So I understand that what I'm asking you is something that may make many of you feel very uncomfortable, and rest assured, I am just about positive that real estate will never bring a half-baked idea, and that the PUC will go over and above and beyond doing their due diligence from this moment forward. And I certainly appreciate Supervisor Peskin, your expertise in peeling back the layers is absolutely critical, and I'm grateful for that voice that you bring to this conversation, because I think that it will clean out our process to where it's clean and transparent. And I think in this age of government secrecy, racism and sexism and all these different things that are circulating in our world, not just in our city, it is absolutely important that we do conduct ourselves to the highest standard possible. And I believe the message has been sent and received. I appreciate the conversation from the BLA. Thank you very much for your expertise, as much as you could opine on this particular matter. So I will wrap up my remarks and again ask that you join me in building this wastewater treatment plant, and let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. I know that we spent some time talking about this, not only in Budget Committee, where I did also bring up the issue about the sole source conversation along with Supervisor Yee, as well as even prior to Budget Committee. I know that there were a lot of questions asked about why did we arrive at the decision the way it is now. In my opinion, I think that a couple things drive this. One really being the marketplace and really trying to secure the land that is the best possible for not just what's going on in Supervisor Cohen's district, but also what will happen to Central Shops. And so for me, that was crucial, as well as the fact that in the last 3 years, it's my understanding that the PUC has spent about $60 million in a combination of emergency contracts and maintenance contracts because of the deteriorating condition of the digesters currently. And then on top of that, a personal visit to the area. I had the pleasure of just visiting, but there are people who live across the street from there every single day who have to endure what is coming out of that facility. So with that said, I think that, again, Supervisor Cohen made it clear that this is not our preference for how we would like to see things coming through so quickly. But I do think that there is a very legitimate need behind this project, and again, given the market conditions. So I will stick with my position at Budget Committee and support this item.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't want to repeat a lot of what the last two colleagues have said. I appreciate the conversation and have listened to the points made by my colleagues, but in the end, I'll be supporting this item. I think, as Supervisor Tang just articulated and as Supervisor Cohen indicated before, this is critically important to our southeastern neighborhoods and to the people who are really impacted by the current unacceptable situation every day. So there is a time sensitivity. I also want to say that the argument about this being an out-of-state registered company, I mean, colleagues, if we want to start applying I don't know Supervisor Peskin did not raise that. If we want to start applying that standard, then boy, we're going to have a lot of scrutiny to do in terms of developers who are working on a variety of topics. And I'll bet if we came up with a list of developers whom we've entered into agreements with on dramatically larger projects than this who are not registered in the state of California, I think we would put this in context and realize that is a complete red herring and really, frankly, irrelevant to the debate today. But with that, I will be supporting this item.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Supervisor Kim.
I just want to appreciate the comments that Supervisor Cohen made. I don't think anyone in this chamber does not understand the importance of the sewage treatment plant, and I think that if any of our colleagues vote no today, it is not because they don't want to see this project happen by June of 2017 or because they don't think that this is important to the community. I think everyone knows it is incredibly important. But it's really a question about the process that the city undertook to bring this before the board today. And it is a very uncomfortable position because we all know that this has to get done, that it is urgent, that we have about a year and 5 months to make this happen. And I really would just say, we can't have things come this way, especially when we've known for years that this was going to be in place. And to say that it's an emergency today, when we've known for years that this had to happen, I just think is disingenuous. Finally, because I was the person that brought up the basis of the LLC, the reason why I bring that up is because this is a sole source contract. It did not go out to bid. I would not normally bring up or be this particular about the bids that come before us and ask why certain things are the way that they are. So let's separate that from all the other major development deals that the city puts together. But also, second, there was a big point made about how this was a Bay Area company that's been in San Francisco for many years. Its employees live here. They're going to do local hire, and yet its LLC is based in another state. So I would not have brought it up if the point wasn't made over and over again that this is a San Francisco company. It's not. So if you're going to make that as part of your point as to why we should support this sole source contract, then I think it should be accurate. And I think that whatever the reasons are underlying the decision, which was not articulated today, then you should not use that as a basis for supporting the sole source bid.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Seeing no other names on the roster, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
On items 13 and 14, Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
No.
Peskin, no. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Weiner?
Aye.
Weiner, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos?
No.
Avalos, no. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
No.
Campos, no. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. There are 8 ayes and 3 noes with Supervisors Peskin, Avalos, and Campos in the dissent.
Thank you.
Okay, those ordinances pass on the first reading. All right, let's go to our 2:30 commendation. And I'd like to, at this time, recognize Supervisor John Avalos.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to call up to the podium Diamond Dave Whitaker, who I am very pleased to be honoring today. We also have an item on our imperative agenda to declare today, February 2nd, 2016, Diamond Dave Whitaker Day.
Oh, my goodness.
It's close to your birthday. It's not quite your birthday.
That's right, but it's close enough so I can say learn to love, love to learn, this never ends.
You're going to have to wait your turn, though, Mr. Diamond Dave. Thank you very much. Diamond Dave Whitaker before us today left Minnesota for San Francisco in 1957 at age 19, seeking a mythical land of all-night parties and free love. Diamond Dave Whitaker is a San Francisco legend, maestro of spoken word, and revolutionary rabble-rouser who uses language to engage and connect. Mr. Whitaker has been described as beat before there were beatniks, hip before there were hippies, punk before punk even happened. Diamond Dave Whitaker has cast a wide net in life, from mentoring a young Bob Dylan in Minnesota, who I think you turned on to Bound for Glory, Woody Guthrie's book, and turned him on to Woody Guthrie, which is like a huge thing for Bob Dylan fans, to pushing boundaries with the beatniks and hippies in San Francisco, to inspiring modern punk and hip-hop musicians. He has found the common thread between many generations of alternative American culture. Diamond Dave Whitaker has been a decades-long supporter of activist movements for social justice. He is a pacifist, has always stood by our veterans, whether from the Vietnam War or any of our subsequent wars, because he understands that a mandatory draft of that time and the poverty draft which supplanted it victimizes the poor and working class of our society. Diamond Dave Whitaker has written spoken word, organized, protested, and taken direct action in support of the innocent, the downtrodden, the disabled, and all who have suffered the unfairness of our social system, which is in dire need of change.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, there's more. Diamond Dave Whitaker promotes engagement through poetry, which he celebrates through the Common Thread radio show on Mutiny Radio, and by hosting the annual Poems Under the Dome. We collaborate on that.
We do.
Open mic poetry event here in City Hall, commemorating National Poetry Month in our rotunda. As Diamond Dave Whitaker is fond of quoting himself, that's true, you are fond of quoting yourself, thus spreading his message of community engagement and empowerment as embodied in his statement, "Strangers become friends, friends become family, family becomes community, and community on the move, that's our movement." Never thought I'd be doing that with you right now. Thank you. Diamond Dave Whitaker served several terms as senator on the City College of San Francisco's Associated Student Council, and he helped organize student opposition to the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges' attempt to revoke City College's accreditation.
Still working on it.
And you actually invited me out to speak
came.
A couple times out there.
Too.
Diamond Dave Whitaker perceives his role as an elder of the community to assist in providing context, lineage, and history, and to treat each other with greater respect, compassion, and kinship. So today we'll be voting to make February 2nd, 2016, Diamond Dave Whitaker Day. And now's your chance to regale us at the podium.
Regale, oh my goodness. Well, that was a number of mouthfuls. And what do they say about something that's written by a committee? That sounds like it was written by a committee, but put together many mouthfuls. Hey, Brother Krusk. Hey, fellow human beings. I'll start out as I take a deep breath. Fellow human beings, members of the board, brothers and sisters, here I be, a long, strange trip it's been. First time I ever stepped in here, 1957, bike messenger by day, beatnik by day and night. It was 1957, and I was in seventh heaven, a non-linear dart on the urban checkerboard. And I first walked in these chambers, and I was just remembering, I thought of it last night because the primary was going on in the state of Iowa, and who won? It was a senator from Texas, am I right? And he reminded me of the guy who I first met here as a congressman from Texas who came up and they took over this Board of Supervisors chamber. It was J. Parnell Thomas. Anybody heard of him? He was the chair of the Un-American Activities Committee. And they came and they used their primary right to come and take over this chamber and invest some of our great intellectuals, some of our great fellow human beings, and bring them up and say, "Are you now or have you ever been?" I was sitting right there in 1957, and we had our hands full. We cheered. The next year, they came again, and so many people came, said this is going to happen once again. The House Un-American Activities Committee, J. Parnell Thomas was his name, later to go to the penitentiary, that they brought the fire hoses out and rolled the folks down the steps. How many here have heard about that? That was 1958. I was on the kibbutz in Israel. But 57, I sat right here. And those days they had different, the benches were different. They had, everybody smoked in those days, and they had ashtrays. And everybody was smoking up a storm. Did you guys know that too? And that was the Board of Supervisors. Pretty funny. And I was here. And this happens to be Super Bowl week, and so I feel an irony. Here it is. Since I've been a long-time member of Food Not Bombs, saying get in the loop and have some soup. No time to frown. It's time to chow down. Food Not Bombs is the key. The food we have is always free. And also the irony in hearing all this earlier, I could help to say the devil's in the details, and it's up to you guys to straighten it out. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. But it is true. There's been a long, strange trip. And I've been at it, and I'm still at it, and you can catch me every Friday on Mutiny Radio. That's mutinyradio.fm, streaming live and podcasted. And I'm thinking about so many times I've been here. I'm thinking about the Board of Supervisors, the first district elections, which I was involved with, the first community congress, which I was involved with. That was the early 60s. And also KPOO Radio, I used to sit right there, and we used to broadcast live on Mondays. Anybody remember that? The Board of Supervisors came way back then. That was a different board. That was before district elections. Mendelson, Pelosi, the Jack Morrison now gone. So many people sat here. And then district elections, the district elections. All of this is running through my head like a great stream of happenings. And so, hey, thanks for bringing me up here. And there's going to be some kind of recognition at the library at 4:30 of all these years, all this water under the bridge, all of this irony, all of this. So I'm really glad to be here. And thanks, Supervisor Avalos, for giving me this recommendation. And I want to say, hey, brother, it is so good to talk to you. And North Beach and the Beats and Ferlinghetti, I could go on forever, but I won't. You've had enough going on forever already today. I'll just draw a close and say peace, love, and understanding. So let's cast that wide net, find that common thread, let life flourish, and say don't panic, just keep it organic. And what came to me just before I turned 78, I'm thinking of an old man now, it's all over. And then I heard the very Great Spirit, and here's what she said: learn to love, love to learn, this never ends. Thanks a lot, people. Thanks a lot. It's good to be here. And the beat goes on. Thanks, people. Anybody else, any other members of the board want to come here and join this? Come on, Aaron. I was talking to you. David, where are you? To be continued. Here's the man talking about City College. That city, in the city, on the planet, and in the street. And here we be, to be continued. The beat goes on.
Thank you, and congratulations, Diamond Dave. You are a true San Francisco treasure. And happy birthday. All right, Madam Clerk, let's get back to business. Item number 15.
Item 15, resolution to retroactively authorize the San Francisco Fire Department to accept and expend a grant in the amount of approximately $781,000 from the Federal Emergency Management Agency to purchase 5 ambulances through August 5th, 2016.
Roll call vote.
On item 15, Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener. Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos. Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. There are 11 ayes.
This resolution is adopted unanimously. Item number 16.
Item 16, resolution to authorize the San Francisco Fire Department to accept a gift of a Worth-built hand-pumped fire engine from the Fireman's Insurance Company and Alliance Global Risk U.S. Insurance Company, valued at $123,000 for use by the San Francisco Fire Department Museum.
Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 17, resolution to retroactively approve the Third Amendment to the Department of Public Health's contract for behavioral health services with addiction research and treatment, doing business as BART, and to expand the contract by 3 years from July 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2018, and a not to exceed approximate amount of $51.3 million.
Same house, same call. Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 18, resolution to authorize the Director of Public Works to execute an amendment to the agreement between the City and Helmuth, Obata, and Casabam, Inc., to furnish architectural and engineering design and related other consulting services for the Traffic Company and Forensic Services Division facility under the Earthquake and Emergency Response Bond Program, and increasing the not-to-exceed amount to approximately $11.8 million.
Same house, same call. Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please call items 19 and 20 together?
Item 19, resolution to receive and approve an annual report from the Castro Upper Market Community Benefit District for fiscal years 2013 through 14. And item 14 is for the Ocean Avenue Community Benefit District for fiscal years 2011 through 2014, submitted as required by the Property and Business Improvement District Law of 1994.
Thank you. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam President. Regarding item 19 in the Castro Upper Market Community Benefit District, I just want to take this opportunity to thank our CBD for the really terrific work that it does in the Castro Upper Market area around so many different needs around cleaning the neighborhood, providing outreach services to homeless people, enhancing security, bringing live music into Jane Warner Plaza, working on so many different issues in the neighborhood and working collaboratively both with residents and merchants as well as our property owners at the CBD that fund the CBD. And I think the Castro Upper Market CBD is really a great example of why CBDs improve neighborhoods. And so I just want to publicly thank our Community Benefit District.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Colleagues, can we take those items, same house, same call? Without objection, the resolutions are adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please call item 21?
Item 21, ordinance to amend the planning code to provide administrative review of affordable housing, permitting it as a principal use and not requiring a planning commission hearing with certain exceptions, and to affirm the CEQA determination and make other appropriate findings.
Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam President and colleagues. Before us today is legislation that will help us to deliver more affordable housing more quickly. I think we all are in agreement that during this housing crisis, we need more affordable housing for low-income and moderate-income people, and we need it yesterday. We need to make sure that we are delivering this housing in an efficient manner. This legislation provides that for 100% affordable housing for low-income or moderate income, in other words, 0 to 120% of area median income, that conditional use will no longer be required. Right now, affordable housing projects are really treated exactly the same as market rate projects, that if you trigger a square footage threshold, it will typically require a conditional use, which, if you're lucky, adds 3 to 6 months to the approval process, and will often add more, 9 or 12 months or even longer. This increases not just the time to deliver a affordable housing project, but makes it more expensive, and we want to be as efficient as possible with our affordable housing, very scarce affordable housing dollars. To be clear, this legislation maintains in place very strong neighborhood protections There will still be full neighborhood notification for affordable housing projects, neighbor participation, full design review by the planning department to make sure that we have well-designed projects. In addition, if neighbors or anyone is opposed to an affordable housing project, they can still seek discretionary review and have a hearing and decision at the Planning Commission. What the legislation will allow us to do is, particularly for projects that do not have opposition, they will not automatically have to go through lengthy, detailed review and then have an automatic hearing at the Commission. We know that the definition or the standard for conditional use is whether a project is necessary and desirable. We apply conditional use for projects where we have skepticism, whether it's chain stores or some other use where it might be a good idea, it might be a bad idea. We know that affordable housing by definition is necessary and desirable. We don't need conditional use to make that determination. I want to thank, first of all, Andres Power in my office for his really amazing work putting together this legislation in collaboration with the planning department and the city attorney, as well as the supporters of the legislation, Mercy Housing, Bridge Housing, Larkin Street Youth Services, Booker T. Washington Community Service Center, our nonprofit affordable housing partners who are actually creating this critical housing. So, colleagues, I ask for your support, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to address why I will not be able to support this legislation today. I mean, there's no denial that our city is in desperate need for affordable housing. I am in full support of increasing investments for housing projects dedicated to our low and moderate income residents, especially families with children, and I have historically voted in favor of this. However, I cannot principally support taking away controls to ensure a neighborhood process when it comes to building the city. This legislation could lead us down a slippery slope, especially for other projects that may want to bypass neighborhood review. I am also deeply concerned about the Affordable Housing Density Bonus Program in its current form, which also limits the community input to discretionary review. Discretionary review places the onus on neighbors, while having a conditional use process places that responsibility on the developer to be a good neighborhood partner from the get-go. As much as I agree that with Supervisor Weiner's statement that affordable housing is needed and desirable, the argument here for me is not the affordable piece of it, but it's really what kind of design are we talking about that one may not agree with. Community support for a project is vital, and we have actually seen projects come out stronger and better with neighborhood input. I understand that we want to streamline housing of San Francisco, but we should not do that at the expense of community engagement. If it takes a few months longer to address concerns and actually enhance a project that will serve the greater community, that is not necessarily time wasted. In my time here at the board, I have always been in support of more community review and engagement. And for example, we're having discussion around the Balboa Reservoir project, and it was going through pretty rapidly, the process, and I realized that the community didn't feel like they were getting their say-so in it. And that's why I actually formed the Community Advisory Committee to be part of the process so that actually the residents would have a little more input. To me, we can't just fast-track projects, and I just think this legislation is the wrong answer to addressing the housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Seeing no other names on the roster, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
On item 21, Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Weiner.
Aye.
Weiner, aye. Supervisor Yee.
No.
Yee, no. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell? Aye. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. There are 10 ayes with 1 no, and that's Supervisor Yee in the dissent.
Okay, the ordinance is passed on the first reading. Item 22, please.
Item 22 is an ordinance to amend the building code to provide that a building in probate shall not be considered vacant or abandoned for purposes of the annual registration requirement for a period not to exceed 2 years if it complies with all codes and does not contribute to blight, and affirming the CEQA determination.
Roll call vote.
On item 22, Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener? Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos?
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The ordinance passes unanimously on the first reading. Item 23, please.
Item 23, ordinance to amend the administrative code to provide notice to tenants facing eviction regarding eligibility for city affordable housing programs and to modify vacancy control requirements applicable to certain agreements with governmental agencies.
Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. Just very quickly, colleagues, this item is a very simple request that when tenants who are facing eviction, they will often get notices from our rent board. And so we wanted to tag onto this notice that tenants receive so that they'll actually get information, which is also available in different languages, about our city's affordable housing programs. We just felt that this was a very simple way to let more people know what resources are available to them. The second piece of this is a minor change that I know has caused some questions, but there's a change regarding vacancy control requirements having to do with governmental agencies, and this was an amendment requested by our city attorney to make sure that we are in conformity with state law. So, colleagues, I urge your approval of this.
Okay, so Supervisor Tang, is that a motion to amend?
Oh, no, it's already contained in the legislation, but I know that some people had questions about one particular amendment that was in there.
Great, thank you. Seeing no other names on the roster, colleagues, can we take this item? Same house, same call. Without objection, the ordinance passes unanimously on the first reading. Next item, please.
Item 24 is an ordinance to amend the police code to prohibit any person from placing, storing, or leaving a firearm in an unattended motor vehicle unless it is in a locked box or a locked trunk of a motor vehicle.
Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank Hillary Ronan, Carolyn Goose, and my staff for the work that they have done in this very important matter. We have a proliferation of guns ending in the wrong hands. Between 2005 and 2010, 1.4 million guns were reported stolen in the U.S. And you know that's that we know of. It's actually pretty scary when you think about the fact that in this country there are somewhere between 270 and 330 million firearms. That's enough firearms for every man, woman, child in this country. Here in the Bay Area, we have seen examples where guns have ended up in the wrong hands, leading to very tragic outcomes. As we know, a case that received a lot of attention, we had a Bureau of Land Management agent who was visiting San Francisco in late June, left his weapon in a backpack inside his car. It was visible in plain sight. An unknown person stole it, and 4 days later, that weapon was used in the shooting that occurred at Pier 14, where they had the tragic death of a woman. Shortly after that, a gun was stolen from the back seat of the Berkeley Chief of Police's vehicle. And only 5 days later, a Hayward police officer had his gun stolen from his car that was parked near a Starbucks in Oakland's Fruitvale neighborhood. We must do better. And here in San Francisco, by passing this law, we are sending the very clear message that if you come into the jurisdiction of the city and county of San Francisco and you happen to have a weapon that you choose to leave in your vehicle, that there are certain things that you have to do to ensure the safety of that weapon, to make sure that that weapon does not end in the wrong hands. Since the introduction of this legislation, we have taken the time to meet with different members of our labor organizations, including the Police Officers Association, the Sheriff's Union, and others, to make sure that we met and confer so that the passage of this law was done in a manner consistent with the rights and interests of our labor partners. I want to thank those labor partners for supporting this legislation and for finding a mutually agreeable resolution that allows us to move forward with the legislation with the understanding that coverage of this legislation does not apply in instances where departments already have policies in place that regulate the conduct of the police officers, among others. I want to thank my co-sponsors of this legislation, Supervisor Marr, Supervisor Yee, Supervisor Breed, President Breed, Supervisor Farrell, Supervisor Cohen, and Supervisor Avalos. I believe that this is a step in the right direction. We know that the state of California now is considering actually adding this piece of legislation, passing a similar piece of legislation for the entire state of California. I'm proud that here in San Francisco, once again, on this very important issue of guns, we continue to lead the way. Thank you very much, and I respectfully ask for your support.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I just want to recognize Supervisor Campos and his leadership. This is an ordinance that should have already been on our books, and I'm glad that we are finally putting it on. There should never be a gun that is not secure left in any vehicle here in San Francisco. Of course, we had the tragic incident that took place over the summer that would not have happened if that gun had been secure in the vehicle. So I just wanted to ask to be added as a co-sponsor, and again want to recognize Supervisor Campos and his office for their leadership in also expanding this ordinance to all vehicles, because there's no reason why we should limit it just to certain types of possession and ownership. So thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the ordinance is passed unanimously on the first reading. Item 25, please.
Item 25 is an ordinance to amend the Administrative Code to revise reporting deadlines regarding equal pay reports and extending the sunset date of the Equal Pay Advisory Board by 9 months to July 2nd, 2018.
Same house, same call. Without objection, the ordinance is passed unanimously on the first reading. Next item, please.
Item 26 is a resolution to determine that the transfer of a Type 21 off-sale general license from 246 B Street to 282 2nd Street for Soma Wines and Spirits, Inc. will serve the public convenience, and to recommend that the California Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control impose conditions on the issuance of the license.
Same house, same call. Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
I believe we're at the roll call for the introduction of new business, Madam President.
Great.
Supervisor Marr, you're first up to introduce new business.
Thank you. I have a few items, Madam Clerk, colleagues. Today I'm introducing legislation that will extend our program that supported local schools by exempting parking lot fundraisers by PTAs and parent groups from being taxed by the city at a 25% rate. I began about 4 years ago after many PTAs were hosting fundraisers for the Outside Lands concert in August or the Harley Strictly Bluegrass Festival in October, and able to raise money for books, PE teachers, supplies, arts, graduation expenses, gardening programs, and computer purchases. I've worked with many of you, Supervisors Avalos, Kim, Campos, Wiener, Farrell, Cohen, and Mayor Lee and his office, but especially Treasurer Cisneros and others, to craft a program that works for our parent teacher associations, PTAs, PTSAs, and PTOs as well, that hold parking events on their local school parking lots, raising needed funds for schools. Currently, San Francisco's Business and Tax Reg Code requires that these events pay a tax at a rate of 25%. it creates a huge burden on many of these parent volunteer organizations. So exempting them is equitable, and it keeps the money up to, I believe it was $30,000 over the past couple of years in the pockets of schools. The PTAs and the Treasurer's Office and the Mayor's Office have worked with me to craft a system that goes through our 2nd District PTA. That's our San Francisco body. And I wanted to thank Michelle Parker 4 years ago for helping us craft this, but also currently the President, Kathy Meyer, for really raising awareness among many schools. Lafayette is the champion of schools, raising about $25,000. I believe it was last year, but also Marina Middle School to many other schools take advantage. Jefferson on the Sunset side and many other schools have been taking advantage. I also wanted to say, too, that we're doing our best to have good accounting so that the PTAs really keep good records. And thanks so much to the leadership of the various PTAs. I wanted to give shout-outs to Treasurer Jose Cisneros, but especially the hard work of Deputy City Attorney Gene Alexander and Greg Cato for crafting a system that really works. And this is really extending this important program. Thanks so much to the parents from schools, not only Lafayette, but Jefferson Elementary, Argonne Elementary, and Presidio Middle School, and now Washington High School for creating a system that can help schools throughout the whole system. So I urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor.
I have a number of other items. Also, I wanted to thank Supervisor Campos for introducing the school and educator eviction protection legislation. In 2010, I worked with the tenant movement. Thanks so much to the late Ted Gullickson, Housing Rights Committee, and many others. We called it the Family Protection Act in 2010 when we saw a lot of evictions, OMI evictions going on. And I wanted to say that South of Market Community Action Network, many others, were really a key part of our work with parents to prevent children from being and families from being evicted during the school year. So I think the process that Supervisor Campos has worked with UESF and others is really important. In 2010, Dr. Mitch Katz, our former head of the Department of Public Health, reported to us devastating negative impacts evictions have on families, especially kids, who tend to feel the impacts of evictions even more than their parents. He stated an eviction can increase anxiety and depression among families. For children, an eviction could mean a change of location, change of school, disconnection from your whole community and your familiarity of San Francisco. It made a sense then to blunt that impact by at least ensuring that a child's sense of stability would not be shattered by having to leave their school in the middle of the school year. And it seems to me that what Supervisor Campos and UESF have drafted, and I support, will really help the displacement of educators. That's teachers, paras, learning support staff, and many others from this similar devastating impact. I know of many teachers from the Richmond District, from Matt Bello to Susan Kitchell to many others that are facing evictions or have been evicted. And I think it's those beloved educators, custodians, it's school support personnel, many that really are part of that community that makes up a school. I think we're doing everything we can to preserve the affordability of San Francisco and the fabric of our communities, and I think this is a timely measure that really is worth strongly supporting and looking at other efforts too. Also, I know there was another item. Give me 1 second. I think I'll stop there and submit, and I think the other item is coming up later in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, I rise today to adjourn the meeting in the memory of two great San Franciscans. First, my neighbor and San Francisco icon and legendary musician, Paul Kantner, who died last week on January 28th after suffering a heart attack. I had the pleasure of seeing Paul almost every morning at the local cafe in North Beach. He was a founding member of the Jefferson Airplane, one of the definitive San Francisco psychedelic rock and roll groups of the 1960s, and the guiding spirit of its successor, the Jefferson Starship. Mr. Kantner died just weeks after it was announced that the Jefferson Airplane would receive a Lifetime Achievement Grammy Award later this month. He was a prolific songwriter, teaming up with Marty Ballin on some of the group's best-known songs, including Today, Young Girl Sunday Blues, and Volunteers. He learned to play guitar in his teens and learned banjo from an instructional book written by Pete Seeger. After attending Santa Clara University and San Jose State, Mr. Kantner plunged into San Francisco's folk scene. Mr. Kantner wrote 4 songs for Jefferson Airplane Takes Off, the group's first album. That album also included 2 of their only top 10 singles, Somebody to Love and White Rabbit, both of which featured his one-time partner, Grace Slick. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1996. He was a friend to the North Beach community, an icon in the city and county of San Francisco, and our regrets to his daughter, China Eisler, and his 2 sons, Gareth and Alexander, and 4 grandchildren. He's a cool guy. I would also, together with Supervisor Wiener, like to adjourn today's meeting for another legendary San Franciscan, a beloved public servant, a journalist who closed 2 newspapers, The News and the Call Bulletin, worked on the campaigns of Lyndon Johnson and State Senator Alan Cranston, was the confidential secretary to Mayor Joe Alioto, a deputy mayor under Mayor Dianne Feinstein, a chief of staff for Mayor Frank Jordan, as well as a deputy mayor for Mayor Art Agnos. He was a fire commissioner. He loved this city, and I think we should give our regrets to the entire city, but particularly his son, Tim. He will be sorely missed.
So you would like to do that on behalf of the entire board?
I would, Madam Chair.
Okay,
Madam
without
President.
objection, colleagues, can we do this on behalf of the entire board? Without objection. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. And I don't believe you mentioned Hadley Roth's name.
Oh, I didn't mention Hadley? I saw him at Original Joe's not too long ago. Yes, Hadley Roth. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And the rest I will submit.
Thank you. Supervisor Wiener. Thank you. Supervisor Yee.
Submit.
Supervisor Avalos.
Just for the imperative agenda, naming today Diamond Dave Whitaker Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Breed. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. I have a couple of items, and the first item is an introduction. Supervisor Marr actually referenced this item, and it's actually a piece of legislation that builds upon the work that Supervisor Marr did a number of years ago, starting in 2009 and leading to the passage of the Family Protection Law of 2010. I'm introducing legislation today that will help families and school workers remain in their homes during the school year here in San Francisco. I want to thank the co-sponsors of this legislation, Supervisors Kim, Avalos, and Marr. And this actually is legislation that came to us as a suggestion from someone who has been working in the field of tenants' rights for quite some time, and that's Dean Preston, who came up to us with the idea of actually protecting educators who are having a tough time staying in San Francisco. My legislation expands, as I noted, on the law that was passed by Supervisor Marr. That law allowed landlords to evict families for owner move-in evictions with children under 18 only during the summer, preventing evictions during the school year as a way of preventing the disruption that could happen when there is an eviction in a classroom. With the legislation that's before you, we are doing 2 things. First, we have expanded Supervisor Marr's previous legislation to include not just owner move-in evictions, but to apply to all no-fault evictions. so that families with kids under 18 cannot be evicted during the school year for evictions related to condo conversion, removal of a rental unit, capital improvement, and substantial rehabilitation. The second thing that this legislation does is that it will include coverage to educators. Educators are individuals that we define as people who work at San Francisco schools directly with students in preschools, home daycares, and K-12 schools in both public and private schools. This would include a teacher, a classroom aide, a paraprofessional, an administrator, a counselor, social worker, psychologist, security guard, attendant liaison, cafeteria worker, custodian, or school nurse. San Francisco is facing an affordability crisis. We're also facing a teacher shortage crisis. This combination has proved very disastrous for our city. What we are doing is a common sense emergency effort essentially to stop the bleeding. We know that there are things we are doing. The mayor, through Prop A that we all supported, has funding to allow teachers and paraprofessionals to become first-time buyers of homes in San Francisco. That's a good thing. But we need to do something to make sure that these educators and school workers are not pushed out from San Francisco. The fact is that for an educator, whether a teacher or a paraprofessional, getting an eviction notice means that they're going to have to leave San Francisco. Right now, a fully credentialed teacher makes less than $3,400 a month. That is, by the way, a lot less, about $200 less than the median rental price of a one-bedroom in San Francisco, which is now $3,600. If you look at a paraprofessional, the situation is even more dire. A paraprofessional makes about $2,083 a month, and if they are evicted, they're simply not going to be able to compete in this housing market. We have a responsibility to not only provide housing, but to make sure that we also provide education. And in this case, housing is directly connected to the issue of education. We cannot have a world-class city unless we have a world-class school system. And we cannot have a world-class school system without educators, without teachers, paraprofessionals, and all the school workers that maintain the stability of the schools in this city. We have in the past talked about the importance of educating our kids, and this is an opportunity for us to actually do something to keep educators from having to leave San Francisco. At the end of the school year last year, we had 500 openings at the San Francisco Unified School District, 500 openings that we could not fill. Related to this, we also had insufficient numbers of substitute teachers. Recently, I called for a hearing on the fact that 1 out of 10 classrooms is facing a lack of substitute teachers, which is impacting the education of our children. Children sometimes must double up with classrooms, causing overcrowding, making learning very difficult in our classrooms. This ordinance will mitigate the effect of displacement on educators and families with children and will help minimize the harm that evictions and displacements can have on children and their school communities. Again, I want to thank Dean Preston, Director of Tenants Together, for bringing this idea to us. I also want to thank my Chief of Staff, Hillary Ronan, for the work that she has done, as well as the United Educators of San Francisco, the Teachers Union, which has actually done a lot of work to have a better understanding of the needs of their members. They did a survey that outlined the importance of this effort, not only for teachers, but also paraprofessionals. Again, I look forward to a robust discussion on this item. My hope is that this is the kind of legislation that not only can be passed by the board, but that it can be passed unanimously. At least that's my hope. The second and last item is a very sad item, and I want to thank the community of the Portal out here in San Francisco, including folks like Ruth Wallace, for helping us put together this in memoriam, but it's in memoriam for a very special person, Irene Crescio, who died on January 26 of this year. Irene was the consummate Portolan. She was born in the Portola, in the house that her grandfather built, and in the house that she lived for her 80-plus years of life. That house and the Portola were her sense of pride and belonging. Irene attended school at E.R. Taylor for elementary education, just steps away from her front door, and went on to attend Portola Junior High School, which is now Martin Luther King Jr. Academic Academy. A further trek from home at half a block away where she lived. She graduated from high school from Commerce High School, which is now the Board of Education building, which is located here at Van Ness Avenue and Market Street. Irene Crescio studied art and drawing and made her career at Pacific Bell in San Leandro, where she worked for more than 38 years. She often told stories of sliding down the hills of the Portola before it was developed and watched St. Elizabeth Church at Gettingen and Wayland being built. She attended movies at the Avenue Theater and rode the streetcars up and down San Bruno Avenue. Stories of shopping on San Bruno were told with excitement, as one could buy anything from groceries to a formal dress with shoes to match on that commercial corridor. Her impact as an element of change in the Portola came after Irene retired. After the 1989 earthquake, the Portola was threatened with the prospect of being cut off from the city and its highways when the Silver Avenue entrance-exit ramp was destroyed. She, typical of her, joined a group of neighbors and local elected officials to ensure that that did not happen. They worked together and successfully lobbied to have the ramps rebuilt and reopened. Hoping to revitalize San Bruno Avenue, Irene worked with the San Francisco Organizing Project, SFOP, to help underground the utility lines on San Bruno Avenue and work with the Department of Public Works to plant street trees along that commercial corridor. She served for many years as a board member of the Portola Neighborhood Association and served on the newly created organization that succeeded it. She also served on the Friends of the San Francisco Library Capital Committee to fund the fixtures and furniture of the new Portola Branch Library, which opened across the street from Irene's home in February of 2009. Irene also served on the Scholarship Committee of the Portola Garden District Tour from 2007 until recently in 2014. She touched most, if not all, of the public projects in the Portola neighborhood by helping to select the designs of everything from what playground equipment at Polega we had when it reopened in 2014 to mural designs on San Bruno Avenue. Irene is said to have been the inspiration for the Alamany Island Improvement Project at Alamany and San Bruno Avenues. And that's just one of many, many projects that Irene made possible. Irene worked as a citizen volunteer in the offices of former Supervisor Sophie Maxwell as well, and was known to many city departments. When you think of the Portola, you think of Irene Crescio, and it's really hard to imagine, impossible really, to imagine the Portola without Irene. Irene is survived by her two nieces, Corinne Faulkner of Daly City, Christine Gavrieli of Pacifica. She's also survived by a cousin, Carol Perez of San Francisco, a great niece and nephew, lifelong friends and neighbors. Irene will be missed. In lieu of flowers, donations can be made to the Portola Neighborhood Association, 2 Borough Street, San Francisco, 94134. Donations can also be made to the Sisters of the Good Shepherds Grade Center at 1310 Bacon Street, San Francisco. So on behalf of the Portola, as the supervisor for this district, it is with great sadness that we mourn the loss of Irene Crescio and respectfully ask that we adjourn the board meeting in her honor today. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Madam President?
Thank you. Colleagues, I have one item today. This is a landmark occasion for our region and for the San Francisco Bay we all cherish and depend upon. Today, along with Supervisor Wiener, I'm proud to introduce the resolution calling for a special election in June for the Clean and Healthy Bay ballot measure. Proposed by the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority as a regional special district, this ballot measure will levy a modest $12 parcel tax in all 9 Bay Area counties. Over 20 years, the measure is estimated to bring in at least $500 million for critical bay restoration projects. And once the region takes this first major funding step, we will be able to leverage even more federal and state funding for the Bay. The funds will go towards a variety of bay restoration projects throughout the region, including flood protection, public access improvements, tidal marsh restoration, water quality improvements, and protection from the potentially devastating impacts of climate change. San Francisco has 10 projects that have been specifically identified as eligible for this funding, including completion of restoration and park improvements at Candlestick Point, wetlands enhancement at Pier 94, design and construction of new shoreline and park areas at Pier 70, including shoreline restoration, habitat creation, bay fill removal, and public access, and restoration at Tennessee Hallow, and environmental education programs for students at the Crissy Field Center. The San Francisco Bay is the heart of our region. It ties all of our 9 counties together. It is the economic and shipping backbone, and it is a source of recreation and wonder for all who live and visit the Bay Area. If we want our children and our grandchildren to inherit a clean and healthy bay, one that will be part of their lives the way it is part of ours, we need to act now to clean it up and to restore it. According to Bayland's Ecosystem Habitat Goals report, written at the turn of the millennium by more than 100 Bay Area scientists, the Bay once featured nearly 200 acres of tidal marshes, but after more than 150 years of development, diking, and filling, only 40,000 acres remain. The Bay needs 100,000 acres of reestablished tidal marsh to be healthy and sustainable. Fortunately, more than 30,000 shoreline acres have already been publicly acquired and are awaiting restoration. The only missing ingredients is the funding to do the work. And that's where this measure comes in. By restoring wetlands that filter trash and toxins from the water and expand wildlife habitat, the Clean and Healthy Bay ballot measure will protect vulnerable species and improve the quality of bay waters. It will also help us prepare for climate change. Tidal marsh around the Bay is critical for improving our region's climate change and resilience. Marshes protect shoreline communities, businesses, roads, and other vital infrastructure from flooding and sea level rise. This measure will safeguard our communities and our economy region-wide, but we must act now before sea level rise swamps many of the restorable acres entirely and make many more too expensive to restore. Work that we once thought we had 50 years to complete, we now must do within 20 years. That is why a ballot measure is so important. It's why this issue is so urgent. The plan is for all 9 Bay Area counties to vote on this measure in June with the hope that it's approved by 2/3 of the votes cast. All of the funds will stay local, and independent audits and annual public reports will ensure proper spending. And by leveraging state and federal funds, the $500 million we raise will help us reach the nearly $2 billion that is needed to keep the Bay healthy and protect shoreline communities for generations to come. I want to thank the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, the nonprofit Save the Bay, and its climate change policy campaign manager, Becky Zier, who has been instrumental in bringing this measure forward. The Bay Area Council and other regional stakeholders. Thank you also to Assemblymember Phil Ting for your bill, AB 746, which made key statutory changes that allowed for this measure to proceed. Thank you to my colleague, Supervisor Scott Weiner, who, as a brand new appointee to the Restoration Authority Governing Board, voted on January 13 to approve placing this measure on the ballot. And thank you to many colleagues who have supported this effort over the years, especially those who have served on the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. The Clean and Healthy Bay ballot measure is supported by more than 60 groups and regional leaders from businesses, environmental groups, labor, and local communities, including the mayors of this specific region, Mayor Lee of San Francisco, Mayor Sam Liccardo of San Jose, and Mayor Libby Schaaf of Oakland, as well as some of my colleagues on the board, congressional leaders, including Representative Jackie Speer, Jared Huffman, and former Representative George Miller, Save the Bay, Audubon, California, Ducks Unlimited, Trust for Public Land, the Natural Conservatory, and other environmental groups and many unions throughout the region. Bill Graham once said, "The Bay is so beautiful, I hesitate to preach about heaven while I'm here." We, the people, are lucky enough to live here. We didn't create that beauty. We merely have the opportunity to enjoy it and an obligation to protect it. With this ballot measure, we will do just that. Thank you, and the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Breed. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you. Colleagues, today I'm introducing a hearing on the state of the city's response to homelessness in 2016. Over the last year and in the recent months, I've received an unprecedented number of calls and emails from constituents hailing from all parts of the city about the status of homelessness in our city and what the city is doing to respond to the homeless crisis. Now, while you know homelessness exists across the entire city, most of you are probably aware of the escalating number of homeless encampments that are growing in District 10 as well as in District 6. Through this hearing, I'd like to know what our city's specific plan is in addressing this crisis in the following areas that I'll lay out for you. First, the mayor's office has announced that it will be establishing a department on homeless services. Well, I'd like to receive progress update on the establishment of this department, including the projected milestones, timelines, and staffing, as well as budget. Second point, I'm interested in hearing from, with the city increasing resources for our homeless outreach team, also known as the HOT team, at DPH by $3 million and increasing a staff of 25 to 60 to over 60, has the Human Service Agency made any adjustments in their shelter bed system to accommodate an anticipated increase of the HOT team placements? What is the status? Here's another question. What is the status of the Department of Public Health's plan for ensuring that those referred for 5150s are immediately directed to case management and outpatient services to address homeless and mental health needs? Fourth question. What is the status and the progress of the city's Family Homeless Initiative with the San Francisco Unified School District to direct services and resources to ensure that elementary school families have shelter? There's been a dramatic reduction in the number of individuals on general assistance over the past 10 years. Yet there are more people living visibly on the streets in poverty and in inhumane conditions. I would like to review data on the numbers of individuals on GA and get a better understanding of why so many people on the street have such difficulty accessing this benefit, which is critical for people to stabilize their housing condition and to exit homelessness. I want to recognize some of the work that people have on this body, the work that people have done. I want to call out Supervisor Farrell and have some brief discussion because he will be hosting a hearing on this issue later on this month. In addition to the topics that he will be covering in the hearing, I'm also interested in learning of any additional information about the existing navigation system, including its progress, its success, its failures, and discussion in possible new locations or for additional navigation centers. There are a lot of rumors that are out there, particularly around the navigation centers expanding. As many of you have read, Supervisor Weiner recently drafted a letter to police, fire, HSA, to the Department of Hope, to the Department of Public Health, as well as to the Department of Public Works, requesting information on the city's efforts to address tents in open spaces, as well as the ban of the enforcement of these tents on public space. I want to also, at this time, in my closing remarks, acknowledge and thank the colleagues who have sponsored this hearing, as it is a citywide issue, not just a district-specific one. It has impacts on all of us. I'm sure we all receive feedback and questions and concerns about it. I want to acknowledge Supervisor Kim that is joining me in this request, as well as Breed and Campos, and any other members of this body that would be interested in supporting this endeavor. I think we need to roll up our sleeves and get real serious and get down to business and figure out what the heck is going on and why. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. As Supervisor Farrell is not present in the chamber, Supervisor Kim.
I'm sorry. One more thing.
Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you. Along in the same vein, I'd like to make a request for the budget and legislative analysts to take a look at the cost of managing and mitigating the impacts of people living on the street versus placing individuals in permanent or supportive housing. Now, there are many unseen costs of homelessness from the city's perspective. Are we utilizing our shelters, emergency rooms, courts, jails, public works, and the police department when we manage and mitigate the impacts of people living on the street? Now, please don't misconstrue my words. I'm not advocating placing homeless folks in jail. As we make efforts to place homeless individuals in permanent housing, I would like to better understand how much it's costing us to manage the currently existing situation. With that, I'd like to request that the board's legislative and budget analysts provide information from relevant city departments to assess the cost comparison between managing someone on the street and placing them in permanent housing for 1 year's time. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, and I do want to acknowledge and thank Supervisor Cohen for calling for this hearing, and I will be co-sponsoring the hearing as well. I'm very interested in a comprehensive presentation from the city on this new Department of Homeless Services and the city's plan of action to address the state of critical homelessness citywide. I also want to recognize Supervisor Farrell, who is calling for a hearing on the navigation center specifically, which will be this Wednesday at Budget and Finance. I will be attending that hearing and with a great deal of interest in its outcomes and how it has gone thus far. But I agree with my colleagues on the board who are calling for a holistic view of this issue from the Department of Public Health to Public Works to the Human Services Agency. We also need to know the real and accurate numbers regarding what the city is spending to address homelessness. How much for families who are homeless versus currently homeless single individuals, homeless veterans versus formerly homeless veterans. I think that it is important to it is too important to simply rely on the numbers that we're seeing get bandied around in the public in terms of how much we are spending on the homelessness issue to criticize our work when it's not broken apart. In fact, a lot of that big number that people express with dismay as saying that the city is spending but is not addressing the problem is actually going towards housing people currently. And I think that we should be able to articulate articulate what those dollars are doing and how they actually have been effective in addressing homelessness. Of course, it does not mean that we have solved the issue. We have much more work to do, and that is why these discussions at the board are incredibly important. Finally, colleagues, today I'm asking the city attorney to draft legislation to ensure that future mega events held in San Francisco, similar to the Super Bowl 50, do not leave taxpayers holding the bill. We should never have been put in a position where taxpayers are subsidizing an event hosted by some of the wealthiest companies in the world. In fact, the one that we are hosting today had been projected to earn $9.2 billion, and that was its revenues 3 years ago, in comparison to the city and county's budget last year of $8.9 billion. I was not the only one who was shocked to learn that taxpayers would be picking up the tab for costs related to a multi-billion-dollar corporate marketing event. I have received hundreds of emails and communications in person, even snail mail and over the phone, demanding that San Francisco be reimbursed, and I know that I'm not the only member of this board that has been hearing this type of communication. I was also dismayed to find out during the 2 hearings that we held on this event that we had no uniform policy on how we waive permitting fees, nor how we define what a quote-unquote civic celebration is. So the legislation that I will be introducing over the next few weeks will require that the city enter formal agreements with any entity that is hosting an event lasting more than 24 hours and requires any kind of fee to attend. I also want to make sure that there are provisions to ensure that a fiscal feasibility analysis be done, as we asked for in the resolution, emergency resolution that was introduced, for any agreement to determine potential costs versus benefits to the city, and that these agreements should be submitted to the Board of Supervisors for review. Neither of these steps were undertaken for the Super Bowl mega event that is taking place currently. Finally, the ordinance will also require that a liability waiver be included in any agreement so that taxpayers are not summarily exposed to liability for unforeseen accidents that could potentially occur at privately run and hosted events, as we realize that is the case today. We need protections in place now so that hardworking taxpayers in our city will never be left holding the bill for our billion-dollar companies. And the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Madam President, that concludes the introduction of new business.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you please read public comment?
At this time, the public may now address the entire Board of Supervisors for up to 2 minutes on items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Board, to include the items on the without reference to committee calendar, items 29 through 34. Public comment will not be allowed where items have previously been subject to public comment at a Board committee, as is the case with items 1 through 26 generally. Pursuant to the Board's rules, Director remarks to the Board as a whole and not to individual supervisors and nor to the audience. Speakers using interpretation assistance will be allowed twice the amount of time to testify. And if you would like to display a document on the overhead projector, please clearly state such to SFG TV and remove the document when you would like the screen to return to live coverage of the meeting.
Thank you. First speaker, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Supervisor President Breed and supervisors. My name is Joseph Cohen, and I have been a San Franciscan. I'm now living in Oakland, but I'm tied umbilically to our dear city. I have a committed stand for a new public park on Telegraph Hill near Coy Tower. This property is 115 Telegraph Hill Boulevard. Many of you previously voted to allow development at this site. You have the power to reverse this decision. The park would feature an aerobics platform, aquaponic, have a hard time with that name, aquaponic gardens, and LED lighting as designed by Leo Villarreal, and would highlight a mini Lombard Street, very mini. This Lombard in the park is for walking and sitting, with donor benches to admire the city by twilight. Visitors would take ecological ideas back to their communities, fostering our reputation for innovation, ecological consciousness, and consideration for our citizens in the open spaces that we provide. I would be honored to return to you at some point in the near future with a preliminary rendering to show you how this would look. I have communicated with, please, because there's not that many, just one more second. I've communicated with Supervisor Peskin prior to his election, and I would know that he could help you get in touch with me if you wish to forward the idea of this rendering to show the board. Thank you very much, Supervisors.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Madam President, Board of Supervisors. My name is Liam Frost. I'm a resident of District 7. I'm here to support Bayview Station, the San Francisco Police Department, POA President Marty Halloran, and Chief Sir. I wholeheartedly disagree with the last week's action to honor a violent criminal. Besides the obvious, there are hundreds of thousands of law-abiding citizens who've never been given that honor. It was a fiscally irresponsible action. I understand where his mother's coming from, because a mother's love is a mother's love and it's a constant. I understand where the lawyer's coming from. I don't understand where you guys come from. That lawyer is going to submit that resolution when they go to court, and that's going to add zeros to that settlement. I'm asking that you direct the city attorney to not settle on this case. I was a San Francisco police officer for 31 years. I served on the Critical Incident Response Team, which responds out to people that are involved in a shooting. And I've sat in the rooms with the people that have been drawn to a situation where they had to use deadly force. And I can tell you there's three things they wish. Number one, that the guy had done what they ordered him to do. Number two, that they wished that they had never come to work that day. And number three, that there's anything they could have done other than what they had to do. People said that they should have gotten out of the way and let this guy pass. If they had done that, and he had hurt one of my families, one of my friends, with that knife he had, then I'd be calling those officers cowards. But today I stand before you and let you know that those officers are heroes, and they're the ones that deserve the resolution, not a violent criminal. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Merlin. I had a career as a taxi driver in San Francisco, but recently you guys sold our careers away to the tech industry. Basically, a lot of taxi drivers feel like you guys aren't doing anything to regulate these people. I'll put up this photo here. This is, if you could switch to the document, this is a photo of drivers in Paris, and this is how they feel as taxi drivers. This is their career gone away. Decades of work, decades of history gone away to a few tech entrepreneurs who are no different than the taxis of today. What do they do differently that's different from the taxis in the city? How do you dispatch a Uber or a rideshare from a taxi? You pick up a cell phone, same way you pick up a taxi. Yet they're given no medallions. They don't have to buy $250,000 medallion. Their drivers get away with committing insurance fraud because you don't regulate them. Uber is lowering their rates. Lyft is lowering their rates. Who's there to say, hey, the rates are going low. I'm not going to pay my commercial rates today. Who's gonna check me on that? They're not going to get checked because they're not regulated. They just got a $7 million fine from the CPCU, right? Us drivers, some drivers are saying the city should pay for taxi drivers to have mental health services because this is what's happening. This is what's happening around the fucking world. I'll put up another photo. This is a photo of police officers turning over cars. Is this what you want in your city? I mean, you're not doing anything to help us. We're sitting around. Like I said, I had a career. Now I make maybe minimum wage, a little over minimum wage. And what's going to change? When's it going to change? See, Uber's like, $50 billion? Yellow Cab's going out of business.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, Madam President, Supervisors. My name is Rodney Hampton. I come here today on behalf of the Hunters View Resident Host Committee, the Hunters Point Alliance Social Club, and We Help Our People, a neighborhood-based organization in Hunters View. I'm here today to say thank you, because of Supervisor Cohen and other city department leaders, commissioners of the San Francisco Unified School District, Commissioner Shaman Walton, Board President Hydra Mendoza, School Superintendent Mr. Golden, Department of Park and Rec, Department of Public Work, and many others have come together to help bring back life within Hunters Point, a park that has been blighted over a decade. 200 Middle Point Road, Ain't B Park, Hunters Point Youth Community Park. It has been a blessing to many like myself, brought families together, brought kids to many areas so they can explore. Crime was down 20 years ago because of that park, bringing those families together from Harbor Road, from Hunters View, from North Ridge. Now, since that park has been blighted over many years, we've been having a lot of devastation. The importance of open space and parks are very critical. And thanks to Supervisor Cohen and these departments, the park has now been revitalized. Resources have been found so that the buildings can be demolished, the habitat and the hazardous waste can be removed, and people can actually live in a green, free, safety community. Thank you again, Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Madam President and Board of Supervisors. My name is Nicole Ferrara. I'm with Walk San Francisco. I'm here today to support item 31 on automated speed enforcement, encourage you all to do the same, and thank Supervisor Marr and Yee for sponsoring the legislation, and also invite you all to co-sponsor the legislation as well. I know many of you have experienced or met people that have experienced traffic violence or have been victims yourself, and you know firsthand the devastation that results from dangerous road design, dangerous streets, and traffic injuries. So we know that speed is at the core of these traffic injuries and fatalities. Over 20% of all injuries and fatalities result from speed. And we have a tool that works in over 140 communities across the United States. But right now, that tool, automated speed enforcement, isn't allowed in the state of California. So we're urging our state delegation to sponsor this legislation so that we can be allowed to use automated speed enforcement here in San Francisco. It's been extremely effective in Washington, D.C. In just 10 years, over 70% of fatalities or traffic fatalities dropped by 70%. That would help us get to our Vision Zero goal here in San Francisco. So finally, I just want to say that you'd be joining today, hopefully, many community groups that have already signed on to support automated speed enforcement, as well as DCCC and others. And I think the MTA has done a really fantastic job of ensuring that this policy and that the legislation captures everyone's feedback and concerns around privacy or accuracy or cost. So looking forward to your feedback.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
I'd like to put this up on the TV, and if I have time, I'd like to sing it. Now, I was at the mayor's office a few minutes ago trying to instruct him and teach, guide, and show him that when he promoted Black Lives Matter, that George Soros is a known Nazi collaborator, is behind it. He's funding it to have the cops killed, to overthrow the United States of America. And he shamelessly says he's a Nazi collaborator. He killed Jews, and he himself is Jewish. But I think one good step against terrorism is to put Infowars.com bumper stickers on all the cops' cars. That will help educate people. But, the answer is Jesus. So I love to preach, and I'm going to spend most of my time preaching. Now, Jesus said, I tell you, if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out.
Now, the context of that statement was Palm Sunday when he rode triumphantly into Jerusalem on the donkey. And he said in Zechariah 9, through the prophet, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass." And he wept over Jerusalem after that incident. And he said, "If you had known, even you, in this thy day, the things that belong unto thy peace, but it's hid from your eyes." And he was weeping when he said that. He was emphasizing, listen, I'm going to tell you something, okay? It's an irrefutable proof, okay? It's an undeniable fact that Jesus alone referred to prophecies written down about him. Nobody in all of history ever did that. He said, "I'll be numbered with the transgressors." He was saying, in essence, read Isaiah 53. The Roman soldiers had no idea when they rolled dice for his purple robe that they were fulfilling the prophecy David said.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi. Let's see. I'm a resident of the Community Housing Partnership Centered Hotel. I've been living there for almost 25 years. I have a copy of my lease. They have not given me a refrigerator in all that time. They're currently rehabbing the building a second time because of broken pipes and lead and asbestos remediation. Let's see. They seem to be moving out people with all their belongings to 1188 Mission Street. However, they told me I could only bring 2 small boxes. Let's see. I have the sink. They replaced the faucet in my room with a working faucet with one that leaks onto the floor. The windows replaced in the last rehab about 8 years ago, I think. They screwed the windows in so tight that it takes about 150 pounds of pressure to open or close, and so it's very difficult to do that. I measured the amount of force to open and close the windows with a luggage scale. Let's see. Also, this building and a lot of other hotels have their light wells covered and sealed with a plastic cover so that there's no fresh air circulation. Let's see. So basically, okay, on the refrigerator, I first went to the rent board, and they told me they weren't. It wasn't their jurisdiction because it was a public housing. I went to HUD, and they told me the same thing. I went to the San Francisco Housing Authority.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
What's the ad? I don't understand. Good evening. My name is Sylvia Johnson, and the reason why the homeless has not been, taken in process is because the person that was supposed to give me a beginning start never did give me a beginning start in the first place. In 2001, it's the same thing. I'm getting tired of the last president that has revenge. Here in San Francisco, there is a policy that they will not help the Statue of Liberty or nothing. And this is the reason why that our states have been coming to a greater disaster. Which is why the CLC is 54 organization with 67.9, 67.8, 28 B plus 67.28 D, which they're never going to start. So, where does a person really, start on this, regaining the United States and the purposes of, You know, we get every president I've seen always got their award, and you put it down as a number thing. That there's no way that can even happen. But as far as supervisors, that I put security for, that the policies that I have, started has a lot to do with some of these things that hasn't been started out. And I think that we need a resemblance because Statue of Liberty can do matters, but they start. Every president got to start.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Shalom. My name is Salah Hakuya Chandler from the Hebrew Cultural Community and EMP, which means Empower My People, the Main One Revolution, in memory of my son, Yalani Chinyamarinde, who was murdered January the 9th, 2015, quadruple homicide, which is still unsolved. I'm here in regards to the rewards that was proposed. I was told in October, basically the introduction of it, through by way of the Government Audit and Oversight Committee. And as now of January, it's still actually nothing happening. We see a lot of changes going forth with the issue that we see happening in San Francisco, but nothing has been done once again concerning these unsolved homicides, which shows forth that it's truly they're put at the end, the back of the burner. And unfortunately, what does a mother or a family member supposed to do when they see that actually this board is not making it a priority? Neither is the San Francisco itself making it a priority. It needs to be a balance. San Franciscans need to understand the problems of 350,000 that have been murdered in the past 35 years and increasing. We say that Black life matters, yet here it is, 4 boys have been murdered, Black boys, and we have serial killers prior to these boys, and we're not making an effort to get these murderers off the streets, which is showing me that this is being allowed in a form of genocide against the African American people. My responsibility now that Dr. Espinola has passed on, she did pass the torch to myself, and I wonder why. I guess she see that I would have the discipline to sit here from 2 to 6 regardless and take a stand for our people because someone needs to care. I'm asking you, please get this voted in, the reward money in memory of all these homicides that have happened. And
thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Come down here, I got really something really good to say. Yeah. Ooh, the city by the bay. Ooh, you better sit down and listen to what I got to say. Yeah, I got to say, Obama, we got a problem. The city by the bay. Ooh. Say, President Obama, we got some drama to the city by the bay. Ooh, one more time, President Obama, gonna have some trauma by the city by the bay. Ooh, the Super Bowl. No, the story got to be told, and then the Super Bowl. Hey, hey. We gotta wipe it clean right here in 2016. City by the bay. Ooh, yeah. Better listen to what I say. Hear the mothers crying and the babies dying. Hood came to the city, ooh, and they got mugged. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Lord have mercy on me. Ooh, yeah, listen here, I got 20 seconds. Ed Lee, ooh, he knows me. We worked together when he was with the HRC. And it's no mystery if you ask to act like Mayor Ellie about me. He'll probably say she's working on some damn conspiracy. I am what's going down in this town. The black population is going down. When the benefits come, we might not.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Next speaker, please.
Gilberti to Townsend. I mentioned this will be the last time I'm going to go through this one. Hopefully I'll get it. I mentioned in 1910 my grandfather got get pinched for pilfering a fruit off a push cart because the Irish cop on the beat was walking. He was integrally involved with the community. My pop in 1921, American socialism, public school. He watched FDR's Social Security, unemployment compensation. He watched good laws being passed, Glass-Steagall. He was part of an army organization that won World War II. In 49, he was in public housing. In 55, he owned his own home because of the GI Bill, American socialism at its best. And the time is stuck on 2 minutes. Maybe I'll get to finish today. In 60, he was part of a trusting, it's still stuck on 2 minutes. So anyway, he was part of a trusting generation that was lost in 1965 because of Vietnam, lies, Gulf, Tonkin, riots, anti-war demonstrations, question authority, hell no, we won't go. 68, the Chicago demonstration, was a police riot. In 1970, Kent State, 4 dead, Ohio. This was huge anti-war, anti-government, and we still have not gotten it right. We don't need 1971 police levels. I know we have more people, but they're basically coders. They're not criminals. What we need in the police is we need a championship team. Who could look at what we saw on television with Oliver Woods and root for that? I mean, you'd have to be a bigot. We need to melt this blue code. The police need to be a part of the trust, the truth, the justice of our community. And now we're asking them to be mental health guardians also. On the radio today, the chief of police was saying in Scotland only 5% wear guns. Maybe in our 2-man teams, one is gun-free. Maybe in the back of a trunk we can throw a fishing net. Maybe fire extinguishers with CO2 can make a person faint. We need intelligent, a Bill Walsh caliber championship team in this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Supervisors, my name is Otto Duffy, neighborhood activist in the area around City Hall here. I welcome all sorts of people who want to look into the homeless problem, try to get to the root of it. I certainly have been studying the issue for a long enough time. I'd say the one thing I would say is that I've learned, and this is a product of our experience with Care Not Cash, is that you just can't close the shelters down. They're part of the system. It's a matter of the balance. They actually help out housing because there are people who don't immediately fit into housing. You have to have shelters. The other thing is the GA system is not the only way to get into housing either, or it should not be. It doesn't fit every single client. Really, what people who don't have housing need is affordable housing. There are a whole group of demographic reasons, why the homeless occurred. Reagan closed down the hospitals, but certainly there's been a divestment in low-income housing over the years. So you got a Republican Congress. There's a whole series of them. Good luck with it.
Thank you. I'm sorry, sir, you've already had an opportunity to speak, so unfortunately I will not be able to recognize you. I apologize. We'll try to get someone to help you after the meeting. Is there any other members of the public who'd like to give public comment at this time? Seeing none, public comment is closed. All right, Madam Clerk, can we go to the adoption without reference to committee items?
Items 29 through 34 are being considered for adoption without committee reference. A single roll call vote may enact these items. A member may object, sever an item, and have it considered separately.
Okay, Supervisor Marr.
Sever item 31.
Okay, Supervisor Kim. All right, on the 34? On the remaining items, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
On items 29, 30, 32, and 33, Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener. Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Aye. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim.
Aye.
Kim, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Those items are adopted and approved unanimously. Madam Clerk, please call item 31.
Item 31 is a resolution to urge the California State Legislature and Governor to pass legislation authorizing the use of automated speed enforcement technology in the city.
Thank you. Supervisor Marr.
Thank you. Nicole Ferreira mentioned a little bit about this, but I wanted to thank Kate Breen, Katie Agnati, Dylan Oyang, sitting in the back from the MTA for championing many different efforts at the state level. Along with my co-sponsor, Supervisor Yee, I strongly urge the support of this resolution. The state legislature and governor need to hear our voice in San Francisco, and they need to hear San Jose and many other jurisdictions as well to pass legislation in San Francisco that would change us, as Tom McGuire from our Livable Streets Division says, from a culture of speeding to a culture of safety. I wanted to say that automated speed enforcement technology, or short-term speed cameras, as we know about red light cameras, will will help us reduce our collisions and deaths and reach our Vision Zero goals. As Nicole Ferreira from WACSF mentioned, we have a very strong and growing Vision Zero coalition in our city, led by not only WACSF but many other organizations on the ground, with victims and families in the lead as well. So that was one thing that is amazing that Nicole and WACSF has built, is a base of victims and families that are in the lead, requesting, demanding change at the state level, and then also building strong coalitions at the local level as well. So San Francisco officials have a strong commitment to Vision Zero, but it's because of that grassroots effort led by our Vision Zero coalition. I wanted to also say that Nicole mentioned 140 other cities and jurisdictions, including D.C., but there's a lot to build off of in our state and in our city. Last December, sitting as the Transportation Authority, we passed a resolution already unanimously. But I did want to say that there's a February 19th deadline for state bills, and I think this is a critical time to send a strong message from San Francisco. I also wanted to acknowledge the Budget and Legislative Analyst's Office for doing reports for the 11 supervisors and others. But Harvey Rose, Fred Brousseau, and others did a great report on the culture of speeding in San Francisco with good models that they looked at. I think the BLA report from last year showed that speeding is the #1 cause of fatal and severe injuries in San Francisco, and it said 10 times more, it kills 10 times more people than drunk driving does. So it's really an issue that we can impact. And as we combat this culture of speeding, I think, and move, as Tom McGuire says, to a culture of safety, I think it's also about a culture of health and livable neighborhoods as well. Having speed cameras encourage drivers to slow down like red light cameras have as well, and they'll help us ensure safer streets for seniors, people with disability, children, bicyclists, and all of us. Thank you so much to the MTA and the Transportation Authority and our broad Vision Zero coalition. I urge your support.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, and I just want to thank Supervisor Marnie for bringing this forward. I'd like to add my name as a co-sponsor, and I just want to reiterate what has already been said. We know that slowing down speed is the number one way to achieve Vision Zero here in San Francisco, but in any city. And in fact, when we got to hear from the chief strategist in Sweden on how they were able to implement Vision Zero, he said without any doubt in his mind that automated speed enforcement cameras was the number one way to get to Vision Zero. And in fact, I'm struck by the statistic that is often referred to, which is if a pedestrian is hit by a vehicle traveling at 40 miles per hour, if 10 pedestrians are hit, 1 out of 10 pedestrians survive. At 30 miles per hour, 5 out of 10 pedestrians survive. But if you're driving at 20 miles per hour, just a 20 mile per hour reduction, so you're still moving along in your car, but you're not going to get to your destination as quickly as you'd like to, 9 out of 10 pedestrians survive. And I think that statistic is stunning and stark. And slowing down is certainly, I think, the best way and most effective way that we can hit Vision Zero. So I'm glad that this resolution is before us, and I'm happy to support.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you very much. I don't want to repeat some of the important points that have already been made. I also support this resolution and thank Supervisor Marr and Supervisor Yee for bringing it forward. I think we need to try new and innovative approaches to having slower speeds on our street and better enforcement in a lot of different forms as part of that. I know that this is a very, very, very difficult issue in the state legislature for a wide variety of reasons, and it's not something that's going to easily move forward. But I do think it makes a lot of sense for local jurisdictions that are doing strong work around making our streets safer just to go on record and try to build that grassroots support for change.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Seeing no other names on the roster, colleagues, can we take item 31, same house, same call? Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you call item 34?
Item 34, a motion to schedule the Board of Supervisors to sit as a committee of the whole on February 23, 2016 at 3 p.m. to hold a public hearing authorizing the Board of Supervisors to update the inclusionary or affordable housing obligation for housing development projects and setting forth increased interim requirements to be proposed to the voters at the June 7, 2016 election.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I do have to make a motion to amend, and I believe we have distributed, or we are distributing copies of an amendment of the whole. This is to invoke Board Rule 3.37 to call the charter amendment out of committee to the committee of the whole.
Supervisor Kim, could you repeat that?
I am making a motion to amend this motion. And it is an amendment of the whole, which we are currently distributing right now. It is basically to invoke Board Rule 3.37 to call the charter amendment out of committee to the committee of the whole, and this is based on advice from our city attorney.
Second.
Okay. The amendment was made and it was seconded. I just want to understand where it is in the context of the resolution.
So my understanding in my conversations with the city attorney is that this just helps to clarify under which board rule we are invoking to call the charter amendment out of committee to the committee of the whole. So it is in many ways just clarifying the motion. And this motion to amend, though, does force this motion to sit another week. So if I do have the votes for the amendment of the whole, this motion will sit for another week, and then we will vote on the motion next week.
Okay. So to our deputy city attorney, I guess what I'm not seeing is the difference in where you put it in the resolution compared to where it currently is. So I think I'm just a little confused, so I don't feel comfortable necessarily voting to support the amendment till I know exactly where its placement is within your resolution.
Perhaps Deputy City Attorney can respond in a way that is clearer than the way that I had explained it.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. So the motion that Supervisor Kim initially introduced would have scheduled a committee of the whole for February 23rd to hear the charter amendment and would have waived the board rule that usually requires charter amendments to be sent to committee. Because that motion on its face waived a board rule, it required 8 votes for passage. The amendment invokes a different board rule, which allows 6 members of the board to pull an item out of committee by majority vote. So Supervisor Kim has amended, or is proposing to amend the motion so that if it passes, the charter amendment will be pulled out of committee and heard by the full board at a committee of the whole on February 23rd. The effect would be the same.
So are you saying that we, if we approve this without the amendment, that we would not be able to sit as a committee of the whole to hear it?
No. Either way, either the original version or the version with Supervisor Kim's proposed amendments, if the motion passes.
As is.
If the motion passes as is or with Supervisor Kim's amendments, the charter amendment will be pulled out of committee and come to the full board for a committee of the whole on February 23rd. The difference in Supervisor Kim's amendment is the board rule that she is invoking in pulling this item out of committee. The motion as is, the original motion, required 8 votes for passage. With the amendment, if the amendment passes, it will require 6 votes for passage.
Okay. I think I understand. Before we vote on the amendment, Supervisor Tang on the amendment.
Thank you. I was actually just going to reiterate what our city attorney had said, and I think that as someone who sits on Rules Committee, I would have preferred to have heard this item in Rules Committee. And so, I understand that we have an amendment before us today, but that would have been my preference as with all other measures.
Thank you. Supervisor Cohen? Okay, Supervisor Peskin? Okay. Any other members on the roster? Okay. So I'm sorry, I got to go back to a clarifying point here, because I think what I'm missing here to our Deputy City Attorney is when we usually make changes to anything, it's clear where the change is made in the resolution. So I don't see the difference between the direct amendment within the existing legislation, and I just really need that to physically be pointed out to me so that I understand exactly what the amendment is and what I'm voting on with the amendment. So to our Deputy City Attorney.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner again.
So we're not. This is not a this that was passed out to me has not been amended. It is exactly how it was before.
No. When the board makes amendments in the legislative process to motions or resolutions, the changes aren't shown in a special font, unlike when you amend ordinances, which is sometimes...
and that's why I need that to be pointed out specifically to me in terms of what we're adding. Thank you, Supervisor Peskin.
For the benefit of everyone, I can say that the document that Supervisor Kim has passed out, the bottom paragraph, the further moved, that the board shall convene as a committee of the whole on February 23rd, that's the same as was in the original. The first paragraph saying moved that under Rule 3.37 of the board's Rules of Order, the board is pulling this item out of committee. That is new in Supervisor Kim's
Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. Okay. Now, I have to run a meeting, so I don't always have time to look at all of these changes, and I want to make sure I understand what I'm voting on before I do so. So the item in Supervisor Peskin, Supervisor Kim, you're on the roster. You have a comment?
No, I was just going to answer the question, but it's been answered.
Okay, thank you. So with that, the amendment has been moved and it's been seconded. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang?
No.
Tang, no. Supervisor Wiener? Wiener, no. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
No.
Breed, no. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen? Cohen, no. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, no. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. There are 5 ayes and 6 noes with Supervisors Tang, Wiener. I have Supervisors Tang, Wiener, Yee, Supervisor Breed, Cohen, and Farrell in the dissent.
Not
Oh,
Yee.
he is a yes.
Yee said aye?
6-5.
I apologize. I thought I heard aye. I thought I heard no. So then, Madam President, the vote is 6 ayes and 5 noes with Supervisors Tang, Wiener, Yee, not Yee, Breed, Cohen, and Farrell in the dissent.
Okay, so the amendment passes. All right, and this item will be on our agenda at the next board meeting.
Madam President, Supervisor Kim, if you wouldn't mind making a motion to continue the item.
Sure.
And we can
Make
reflect
a
that
motion
in the minutes.
to continue this item 1 week.
Okay, a motion has been moved to continue 1 week. It's been seconded by Supervisor Peskin. And just for clarity to our Deputy City Attorney, just for clarity for this particular item, we can't vote on this item today as amended.
That's right. The board rule that the motion invokes requires the clerk to pull the item up to be heard at the next board meeting. And if you passed it today, it would have to come up for the February 9th board meeting, but the Municipal Elections Code prohibits you from considering the charter amendment on February 9th.
Okay.
So you have to...
And let me just also ask another question. So it is necessary for it to be continued through the process of making a motion to continue it?
That's right. You could not pass this item today.
I understand that, but we have to continue it.
You could table it. You could amend it further. You could take any number of other actions. You can't pass it today.
Okay. And we can't vote it down today.
There's a motion made and seconded.
Excuse me, you have not been recognized, Supervisor Peskin. Thank you. And so we can't pass it today, and we can't vote it down today.
I would defer to the clerk on motions that could effectively vote the item down today. But I believe you could, the board could adopt a motion to table the item if you wanted to. You just can't pass the item today because of the timing.
Okay. Thank you. So there's been Supervisor Wiener.
Point of information, is there a motion on the table?
There's a motion on the table to continue this item 1 week by Supervisor Kim, and it's been seconded by Supervisor Peskin.
Okay. And would a motion to table take precedence over a motion to continue?
Over a motion to continue, yes.
Okay. I move to table this item. And I want to just explain, this item should be heard in committee. There is absolutely no reason to pull this to the full board for a committee of the whole. I think we all have a responsibility as legislators, especially, there are times when legislation has to be rushed for various reasons. When you're talking about something as significant as this, when we are all wanting to increase the inclusionary percentage, and the mayor and President Breed have to be in the working group to do it, there's no reason why we have to just sort of rush something through that can't even be amended anymore, no matter what happens at the hearing, from what I understand, because this was introduced so late. And so this should be heard in committee. This should be vetted in committee. We should be working together, making sure that this charter amendment is as good as it can be. And to try to muscle this through the board in this way, I just don't think is the right way to proceed. And so I move to table.
Okay, Supervisor Wiener's moved to table and seconded by Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Peskin.
I rise to respectfully suggest to this body and to the members of the Rules Committee that an issue of this import actually should be heard by this entire body. I believe that we all have the skills and the ability to deal with it. Yes, we have a committee system, but we also have a system that provides for committees of the whole. The time frames are tight. I believe that if you know about the policy of this matter, we're dealing with procedural issues today, but if you know about the policy that is set forth in this charter amendment, ultimately it will be up to this body to adopt an ordinance once the charter amendment gets on the ballot. That is really where we need to be coming together, and rather than having these procedural arguments, which to me are arguments about who wants to raise the percentage of affordable housing to what rates, which I can quite frankly say as the newest comer to this board, have been unfortunately much lower than they should have been during one of the largest building booms and affordable housing crises this city has seen since the gold rush. And that may sound like hyperbole, but it is actually true. And so let's not get involved in the politics of delay. Let's bring this to this board on February the 9th. Let us have a committee of the whole on February 23rd. Let us send this to the ballot. Let the voters decide on June the 7th.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you. I know that we all want to get out of here. Look, bottom line here is that this is important. We have, when matters of such importance come up, decided to have certain matters heard by the entirety of the board and not just one committee, and this happens to be one of those. The mission moratorium was another example of that. But let's also be honest, for members of the public who are watching these proceedings, we have a committee structure that right now has the key committees controlled by more conservative members of the board. That will make it difficult for certain things to come out of committee. And so the new majority of the Board of Supervisors will have to resort to bringing items to the entire board so that certain things can be voted on. And that's what's happening here. And, you know, it's not, it's something that everyone has done in the past, and it's just the reality of where we are. It's, you know, we're simply trying to move an agenda forward, and each side is trying to do what they can to keep that from happening or to make that happen. That's just the way things are.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you very much. I always find it interesting in San Francisco political debates when people who would be considered uber lefties pretty much anywhere in the universe are referred to as somehow conservative in San Francisco. I think it's ridiculous, but it's actually, in some ways, it's one of the reasons I love this city, because we are all so progressive and left. There's all these tiny gradients. So, but I do think, you know, when we have rhetoric at the Board of Supervisors like that, it just doesn't help the conversation. What I will say is, if this goes to committee through the regular course, it can still go onto the ballot in June if that is the right thing to do. And right now, on February 11th, as I understand it, a Rules Committee, there will already be heard the two ballot ordinances that have been placed on the ballot, one by Supervisors Kim and Peskin and a few others, and one by the mayor. And in fact, the ordinance that Supervisors Kim and Peskin and others have placed on the ballot relate directly to this charter amendment, because the charter amendment sets a certain baseline and allows the board to then make adjustments to it in the future, whereas the ordinance, as I understand it, then constrains the board's ability to do that. And so to have one of those heard in a committee and then have the other one heard at the full board, I just don't think that that is the best way to proceed. Again, there's nothing about February 11th at the Rules Committee that would prevent this from going onto the ballot in June. And so I think we all agree through the chair, Supervisor Peskin, that we absolutely need to increase the inclusionary percentage, but we also, I think, need to have good process in making these important decisions.
All right. Seeing no other names on the roster, Madam Clerk, on the motion to table, can you please call the roll?
And Madam President, I'll just request that members use the microphone so I am able to hear. Thank you. Supervisor Marr?
No.
Marr, no. Supervisor Peskin?
No.
Peskin, no. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee?
No.
Yee, no. Supervisor Avalos?
No.
Avalos, no. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
No.
Campos, no. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim?
No.
Kim, no. There are 5 ayes and 6 noes with Supervisors Marr, Peskin, Yee, Avalos, Campos, and Kim in the dissent.
Okay, the motion to table fails. So, do we take on this next motion to continue the item? Sounds like it.
That would be in order.
All right. So, seeing no other names on the roster, Madam Clerk, on the motion to continue to the meeting of February 9th, can you please call the roll?
Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Okay, the item number 34, as amended, has been continued to the meeting of February 9, 2016. All right. Next, Madam Clerk.
There is an imperative item, which I handed my copy to the Sergeant at Arms. Thank you. An imperative item offered by Supervisor Avalos, a resolution commending Diamond Dave Whitaker for his contributions to the arts, culture, social well-being, and peace, and declaring February 2nd, 2016 as Diamond Dave Whitaker Day in the city and county of San Francisco.
Okay, Supervisor Avalos.
Yes, I pretty much read the content of the resolution. It is a mix of fact and legend, and I urge you voting on it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, would you like to make a motion to move the specific findings before we take public comment?
Yes, I would like to move the motion on the findings.
Okay, that it's purely commendatory, and the need for action came after the attention of the board after the agenda was posted.
I appreciate your kibitzing. Yes, I move that motion.
Thank you. Seconded by Supervisor Campos. Colleagues, can we take this without objection? Without objection, the findings pass unanimously. And now at this time on the imperative item, is there any members of the public who'd like to comment on the imperative item only?
Ms. Johnson, this is about Diamond Dave Day in the city and county of San Francisco.
And I talk about Diamond Dave Day, and there again, that claims the first part I have already said about, and there's that I had put some security policies that it should be different in this organization, but if this ain't going to change, then this is like saying, well, I might not be here.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that like to give public comment on the specific imperative item regarding Diamond Dave Day in San Francisco? Seeing none, public comment is closed. All right, colleagues, on the item as amended, can we take this, on the imperative item, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the imperative item passes unanimously. All right, Madam Clerk, can you please read the in memoriams?
Yes, today's meeting will be adjourned in memory of the following beloved individuals. On behalf of Supervisor Peskin, for the late Mr. Paul Kantner, and on behalf of Supervisor Peskin and Supervisor Wiener, at the request of the entire Board of Supervisors, for the late Mr. Hadley Roth, on behalf of Supervisor Campos, for the late Miss Irene Crescio.
Okay, this brings us to the end of our agenda for today. Madam Clerk, is there any other business before us?
That concludes our business for today, Madam President.
Seeing none, we are adjourned, colleagues. Have a good day.